Chapter 2017. Shen Manting lay down and closed her eyes. She was so sleepy that she fell asleep as soon as she closed her eyes. During this period, the baby woke up twice. Shen Manting fed him twice and changed his diaper once. After that, the sky was bright. Shen Luoan seemed to be sleeping soundly, but in the middle of the night, Shen Manting vaguely felt a strange touch on her body. This feeling was inexplicable, but she woke up several times to see Shen Luo and huddled in the corner. Shen Manting felt lucky, but she also felt that she was being ridiculous. Shen Luo and might not care about her. For example, she had become much uglier since she came here. Moreover, after giving birth to the baby, her belly began to grow fat. Her body was thin, but her belly was bulging, which was very ugly. The sky was bright, and Shen Manting got up and stretched her back. The baby was still sleeping, and his little mouth was slightly pouting. He looked especially cute. Shen Manting's lips curled into a smile as she entered the bathroom. After she was released, she went to her room to wash up. The door was closed, and Shen Luo quickly put down the quilt. He turned over and hugged the quilt in a good mood. He smiled slightly. Shen Luo woke up after 9 o'clock in the morning. Shen Manting didn't know how long she had been holding the baby. Seeing him obviously sleeping soundly, she felt unhappy. Although he had been busy the whole day yesterday, he should have had a good rest. But his behavior of completely ignoring the baby made her very angry. After washing up and eating breakfast, Shen Luo went to change his clothes. He said, "Change your clothes and go buy something for the baby." Shen Manting was stunned. "You don't have to work today?" "Yes, I finished my project, so I can take a day off." Shen Luo took the baby and urged, "Go quickly. It's rare that I have time today. The baby is missing a lot of things. Take this opportunity to make up for them." "Missing? What is it missing?" Shen Manting couldn't think of anything. It seemed that he had everything he needed. Shen Luo didn't look at her anymore. He was holding the baby in a very good mood, and he laughed. Like a big fool. Shen Manting felt a little disdainful, and then went back to the room to change. The clothes were very simple. She bought them last summer. They were a little big, and the pants couldn't fall. From time to time, he would tug at his pants. Shen Luo seemed to notice it. He frowned and said, "What are you wearing?" "What are you wearing? Go and change." "I have no clothes." Shen Manting said confidently, "I used to weigh 120 kilos, but now I'm less than 50 kilos. I'm all big now. I'm not small anymore." Shen Manting was tall. She was 168 centimeters tall and had a voluptuous figure. Especially her breasts. One could tell at a glance that they were heavy. At this moment, Shen Luo looked at it. Indeed, it seemed to have shrunk. Shen Manting noticed his gaze and glared at him. "What are you looking at?" "I have a belt in the bathroom. Put it on yourself." "I don't need it." Shen Manting quickly returned to the nanny's room and changed into a long dress. Although it was a little wide, it still looked quite fitting. Nanny he watched from the side and continued to work. A smile quietly spread across her face. My goodness, he's finally enlightened. These few days of brainwashing weren't in vain. Chapter 2018. "Got it," Shen Manting replied. She took the baby from him and stuffed the large backpack into his arms. Shen Luo raised his eyebrows slightly and didn't care. When they arrived at the mall, Shen Manting found a stroller in the trunk of the car. She stuffed the baby and baby supplies into it and went straight to the baby's exclusive floor. Shen Manting didn't think that the baby lacked anything before, but when she arrived at the mall, she felt that everything was useful. She asked the shop assistant to carry the shopping baskets and added one after another. After a while, there were 2 big baskets. When she paid the bill, it cost nearly 20,000 yuan. Shen Manting was shocked and exclaimed, "Baby things are so expensive now?" The shop assistant smiled and said, "Yes, babies are weak, so everything has to be the best." As he spoke, he looked at the baby in Shen Manting's arms and said, "Especially for such a small baby, his immunity is relatively low. If the products aren't used well, he might get sick. Our brand is very good, and many celebrities like to use our products." That's right. When Shen Manting heard this, she actually felt that it made sense. But it was a little too expensive. It seemed that she didn't buy much in total. There were a few milk bottles, other baby disinfection cabinets, and other miscellaneous things. There weren't many big things, and they were all miscellaneous small things. Seeing Shen Luowen swipe the card, her heart ached a little. Shen Luowen glanced at her and saw her obviously distressed expression. He said, "I didn't ask you to pay for it. I bought it for my son. Why are you distressed?" Pfft. Shen Manting rolled her eyes at him and then walked away with the baby in her arms. "Go back. What's the hurry?" Shen Luowen signed and then looked at the shop assistant. "We'll pick it up later." "Okay." The shop assistant smiled brightly. "Then I'll pack it for you first. Remember to come back later." "Okay." Shen Luowen pushed the small stroller away. Shen Manting turned around and said, "Hand me the milk bottle." Shen Luowen bent down and handed it to her after finding it. Shen Manting fed the baby as she walked and asked, "What else do you want to buy?" "To the 3rd floor." "The 3rd floor?" Shen Manting looked at him strangely. "That's the women's section. I'll buy you a few. Look at what you're wearing." Shen Luowen looked as if he couldn't bear to look at her. "Those who don't know might think you're pregnant again. How are you going to answer them when they ask?" Shen Manting. "Moreover, it's obviously an old dress. I'm too embarrassed to tell others that you're my son's mother." Shen Luowen stepped into the elevator in disgust and pressed the button for the 3rd floor. Shen Manting was still standing at the door, looking indignant. Still not coming in? Only then did Shen Manting walk in with the baby in her arms. In this shopping mall, consumption was the first line. Even though he didn't buy many baby products, he still spent so much money. Of course, the quality of women's clothing was not low either. Shen Luowen walked into the store that Shen Manting used to like. As soon as he walked in, he saw a dress that was popular this season. "This looks good," he said. Shen Manting, who was standing behind them, guessed that the dress probably cost a few thousand yuan. She looked at Shen Luowen and said weakly, "I think my clothes are pretty good. Let's go. Go and give it a try." Shen Luowen took the baby over and held the bottle. Shen Manting was stuffed with a piece of clothing, and she felt very unconfident. Chapter 2019. The waiter quickly came up and said, "This is our new collection for this season. It just arrived and shows off your figure." As he spoke, he had already taken off the dress and said, "Try it on. It must look good on you. You have such a good figure." Shen Manting looked at the dress and felt a little tempted. The pink dress made her look thin and beautiful. One look and you could tell that it was a small size. She didn't even dare to think about it. In the past, she used to wear large sizes. She carried the dress and reluctantly entered the fitting room. She quietly looked at the tag and was shocked. Hundreds of thousands. 4,800. Shen Manting's hands were trembling. It was so expensive. If she was still working at her previous job, she would have to eat or drink for a month to wear this dress. Shen Luowen had just paid 20,000 yuan, and this dress. But it was really beautiful. After seeing the price, Shen Manting wanted to try it on. After all, it was free to try it on. Shen Manting hesitated for a moment and put it on. She put it on and zipped it up. Her hair, which had been tied up to make it easier to carry the child, became messy in an instant. She simply took it off and let her long black hair fall over her shoulders. When she opened the door and walked out, the waiter exclaimed, "Wow!" Shen Luowen heard the noise and turned to look. His eyes lit up and stared straight at her. Shen Manting was obviously much thinner than before. But she still had the parts that should be there. Her waist was slender, her breasts were full, and her whole figure was perfect. Her hair was loose, and she looked like she had returned to the old Shen Manting. The high-spirited, proud, and sweet Shen Manting. However, the Shen Manting who had calmed down made him feel even more sorry for her. Shen Manting also couldn't believe it. She looked at herself in the mirror and couldn't believe it either. But this dress was too expensive. "I'll take this one. Try these too." Shen Luowen brought her a few dresses, including a skirt and pants. The waiter took them with a smile and said, "Okay, then I'll bring new goods from the warehouse. Please wait a moment." Shen Manting felt guilty. She walked over and gently touched his back. She pulled his sleeve and said, "That dress costs 5,000 yuan. It's too expensive." Let's go to another store. Shen Luoan glanced at her face and said, What are you afraid of? I didn't ask you to pay for it. As he spoke, he gave her a push. I'll have to bring you along when I go out in the future. Are you trying to embarrass me by wearing that? These words seemed to contain a lot of information. Shen Manting was stunned. Before she could react, Shen Luoan nudged her and said, Help her get changed. The waiter quickly responded and came over. I'll do it myself. Shen Manting stood in front of her and took the clothes from her hands. However, every time he changed a set, Shen Luoan would only say one word, I want it. Shen Manting thought he was crazy. She gritted her teeth and asked, Did you get rich? No. Shen Luoan smiled. But I can afford to buy a few clothes. Shen Luoan. Shen Manting stamped her foot and said anxiously, I won't return it to you. So much money. The clothes in this shop were very expensive. She used to be reluctant to buy so much. Now that he suddenly gave her so much, Shen Manting felt her heart bleeding. Although it wasn't her money that was being spent, it was indeed a lot of money that was flowing out. Chapter 2020. Shen Manting was stunned when she heard this. She looked up and saw Shen Luoan's expression. At that moment, Shen Luoan seemed to be looking at her with an indescribable softness in his eyes. She subconsciously took a step back, and then Shen Luoan said, Go and change them. If you don't like them, then don't want them. Don't like them. How can I not like them? They're so beautiful. Shen Manting took the clothes into the fitting room, and when she came out again, she looked completely different. Shen Luoan was very satisfied with his taste. He nodded and said, I'll take them. No, I don't like them very much, so I don't want them. The attendant smiled and nodded, Okay, I'll wrap up the previous ones for you. Okay. Shen Luoan answered before Shen Manting could say anything. The attendant was very happy and quickly asked her colleagues to bring out the goods. After checking and packing them one by one, they took out all of them. There were a total of 8 bags, which cost more than 30,000 yuan. Shen Manting felt her heart twitch when she saw the number and said, Shen Luoan, hold the baby. Shen Luoan handed the baby over. Little Moon was already asleep, and his little white and tender fists were clenched. Shen Manting felt that she had had an incredible day. She turned back and looked at Shen Luoan, who was swiping his credit card, and her heart was pounding. She knew that Shen Luoan was rich. But she couldn't afford so much money. It was just a few clothes. Did he have to spend so much? He was a prodigal. Shen Luoan signed, and when he left with the bags, he saw Shen Manting in a daze. Let's go. Shen Manting came back to her senses and followed him out. Shen Luoan hung the bags directly on the stroller's handle and slowly pushed the stroller back to the 7th floor. The baby products were all packed, and the driver was already in place. When he saw them coming, he quickly sent them to the garage. Shen Luoan and the driver put everything in place, while Shen Manting sat in the car. When they finished, she had been in a daze for a long time. When he returned to the driver's seat, Shen Luoan started the car steadily and glanced at Shen Manting. Shen Manting held the baby in her arms and didn't dare to speak. After a while she couldn't help but say, These clothes are too expensive. It doesn't matter. I'll deduct it from your salary. Shen Luoan held onto the steering wheel. He seemed to be in a good mood. What do you want to eat? Are we still going to eat? The baby has been out for a long time. Of course we have to eat. How can we take care of the child if we don't eat? Shen Luoan glanced at her. Let's eat Hunan cuisine. I haven't had it in a long time. Hunan cuisine. Shen Manting gulped. She also had not eaten for a long time. He lowered his head and didn't say anything else. Shen Luoan carried the baby in his arms and put on the baby's supplies. The baby woke up as soon as he got out of the car. He opened his eyes wide and looked around. As expected, Shen Manting went to the maternity ward first. Sure enough, the baby had diarrhea. After wiping his butt and changing his diaper, she carried the baby into the dining room. Shen Luoan had already begun ordering dishes. She heard a few of them: Mushu pork, crispy and tender spotted chicken, mushroom yolkless egg. Shen Manting almost drooled. She held the baby in her arms and lowered her head. She was in a great mood. Chapter 2021. Okay. Shen Manting put the baby back in the stroller, and soon the dishes were served. Shen Luo and didn't eat much spicy food, but Shen Manting liked it very much. He ordered a lot of spicy dishes, and they smelled so good. Shen Manting ate happily, but Shen Luo couldn't stand it anymore. He kept drinking water and inhaling air. Shen Manting glanced at him and said with a smile, "It's no use. You're already like this after eating so little." Shen Luo didn't say anything. He picked up a piece of spicy meat with his chopsticks and stuffed it into his mouth. He drank water while stuffing it and said calmly, "It's quite delicious." It was just a little spicy. Shen Manting silently looked at his flushed face and bright red lips. She pursed her lips and didn't expose him. But she already had a mocking smile on her face. Shen Luo saw it, and his expression became even calmer. He silently moved his chopsticks to other dishes that weren't spicy. Shen Manting laughed while eating. Even she herself didn't realize how wonderful her mood was at this moment. After the meal, the two of them took the children home. It was already past 1 o'clock in the afternoon when they arrived home. This was the time when the desire for a nap was strongest. Shen Manting felt sleepy after changing the baby's diaper and feeding him milk. After coaxing the baby to sleep, she came back to her senses and found Shen Luo doing something in the room. Shen Manting knocked on the door twice, and after a while, she opened the door and walked in. Shen Luo sat on the edge of the bed with a notebook on his knees. His fingers were typing quickly. "Where's work?" Shen Manting quietly walked in and put the baby in the small crib. Shen Luo glanced at her and said, "I'm going out for a while. Look after the baby." "About work?" "Yes, a new drug has been developed recently, and Lao Wu has an appointment for dinner." "Oh," Shen Manting replied. She felt a little strange. Lao Wu was his partner, but most of the drug development was handled by Shen Luo himself, and Lao Wu was responsible for marketing and communication. Why did Shen Luo have to do it himself now? Shen Luo seemed to see through her doubts and explained, "I'm the main person in charge, and only I know a lot of the principles." "But didn't you just finish eating?" "The dinner is at night. I have to go back to the lab now." He turned off the computer and placed it at the foot of the bed. He stood up and said, "Take care of the child. I'll probably be back later." "Oh, let's go." Shen Manting felt a little uncomfortable and muttered, "Why are you telling me?" It was as if he was telling her something. What was there to explain? She didn't have a good relationship with him. The corners of Shen Luo's lips curled up slightly, and he quickly walked to the cloakroom. He picked out a suit and changed into it with a swagger. He didn't seem to mind Shen Manting's presence. Chapter 2022. Nanny. He walked in from outside and smiled when she saw the scene. They seemed to be getting along well today. She was finally enlightened. She walked over with a smile and asked, "Are you used to being back for a few days?" "Yes," Shen Manting replied and glanced at Nanny. "I'm fine. We're quite familiar with each other." "It's nothing." "That's good." Nanny's smile widened and said, "Eldest young master looks much better with you here. He looks energetic today, as if he's married." Shen Manting felt that Nanny's words had a hidden meaning. She smiled and didn't reply. "The baby has obviously behaved a lot these days. I don't see him crying anymore. He used to throw tantrums when I held him. He was very angry, just like his father." Nanny took over and helped her rinse the bottles. "But he's better now. Oh, by the way, I saw old Yang bring back a few boxes of things. They say baby products." "What are they?" "They're for the baby." Shen Manting seemed to have just remembered. "Pack up the bottles. I'll go get them." "Okay, go ahead." Nanny looked at her with a smile. "Remember to teach me how to use the machines." Shen Manting agreed with a smile. She quickly wiped her hands and unpacked all the baby products she had just bought. The bottles, the disinfectant cabinet, and some other things were in a mess. When she was done, she asked Nanny to help her wash the bottles and then went to install the disinfectant cabinet. There used to be a disinfectant cabinet at home, but the baby's things were getting more and more and more. In addition, Shen Manting also found a room. The room was empty. It used to be her room. Now she asked Nanny to help her clean up and put the baby products in it. It was already evening when she was finally done. The baby woke up twice and went back to sleep after feeding. Shen Manting was sleepy. When Nanny he went to cook, she took a nap in the baby's room. However, she didn't sleep for long before she heard Nanny he calling her. Shen Manting thought she was dreaming at first, so she didn't pay much attention. Unexpectedly, after a while, she heard old Mrs. Shen's voice. She was startled and immediately opened her eyes. In a flash, the door was opened. When old Mrs. Shen saw Shen Manting, her face was filled with excitement. She looked at her and stomped her foot. "Manting, you're finally back." Old Mrs. Shen's loud voice startled Shen Manting, who hadn't fully woken up yet. She quivered and immediately woke up. But before she could react, she saw the old lady walking towards her. Her arms were wide open and she was about to hug her. Shen Manting felt a little uncomfortable after being hugged. She called out, "Grandma." "Hey, hey, hey." Old Mrs. Shen's eyes were filled with tears. She sniffled and shouted, "It's good that you're back. Grandma missed you so much." Shen Manting was flattered and felt a little out of breath from his embrace. She reached out and pushed the baby. Then, she heard the sound of the baby crying. Old Mrs. Shen immediately loosened her grip and said, "Look at me. I scared little Moon." Old Mrs. Shen's eyes were filled with tears. She looked at Shen Manting and said, "That's great. Little Moon has a mother now." Shen Manting hurriedly stood up and went to carry the baby over. Chapter 2023. Woo! She looked at Shen Manting, who was pouting and had tears in her eyes. Old Mrs. Shen was unhappy and joked, "Humph, look at this little guy. He knows how to act like a spoiled child now that he has a mother. He used to know how to open his mouth and cry." Shen Manting didn't know why, but when she heard that, she felt a surge of satisfaction. The baby seemed to understand old Mrs. Shen's words. He stopped pouting and opened his mouth to respond. Old Mrs. Shen smiled and felt very emotional. He's finally back. The baby will be very happy in the future with his mother by his side. Grandma. Shen Manting looked at the old lady and felt a little guilty. What happened before? Old Mrs. Shen was stunned for a moment before she realized that she was probably referring to the incident before the new year when she went to pick her up but returned empty-handed. She smiled warmly and said, "Don't apologize. I understand, but you're not allowed to leave again. If you leave, our family will be incomplete." Shen Manting's heart trembled slightly. She thought she had heard wrong and looked at her. Old Mrs. Shen stepped forward and put her hand on Yi Qianqian's shoulder. She said, "No matter what your identity is, you are a part of our family. This will never change. I will always be your grandmother. Do you hear me?" These words. How could she have never known that her grandmother could be so emotional? Shen Manting couldn't help but nod with tears in her eyes. Old Mrs. Shen was overjoyed. When she saw Shen Manting's reaction, she laughed and said, "Grandma bought a lot of things. Let me show you." Old Mrs. Shen and old Mrs. Dongfang's trip seemed to be very fruitful. She took out a lot of things and kept bragging to Shen Manting. Shen Manting was confused, but she nodded in agreement. Nanny he was very relieved when she saw it. Shen Longyue and Mrs. Shen came back from work together and had a happy meal with the family. It was said that Shen Jielie and Yi Qianqian had gone to Yun Town the day before. It was estimated that it would be some time before they returned to the capital. After dinner, old Mrs. Shen chatted with Shen Longyue, Mrs. Shen, and Shen Manting for a long time. They didn't leave until 9 o'clock in the evening. Shen Manting had just taken a shower and played with the baby for a while when she heard her phone ring. It was Shen Luoen. Shen Manting glanced at the time. It was already past 10 o'clock. Why didn't he go home? Why did he call her at this hour? When he picked up the phone, he heard the noise of people on the other end. But she did not hear Shen Luoan's voice. Shen Manting frowned and called out, "Shen Luoan?" After a few seconds, someone replied, Manting." The drunken voice belonged to Shen Luoan. Shen Manting had a bad feeling about this. "Are you drunk?" "I'm not drunk," Shen Luoan said. "I just had a few drinks and can't drive anymore. Come and pick me up." When Shen Manting heard this, she subconsciously glanced at the baby in her arms. "I'm at home looking after the baby. Why don't you call a designated driver? If you don't pick me up, I can't go back." Shen Luoan was so drunk that he could barely speak. Why? You can take a taxi back. Just leave the car there and drive it back tomorrow. Shen Manting looked at the time. Is it far from home? Chapter 2024. Shen Manting felt as if her heart had been struck by something suddenly. It sank suddenly, and was so heavy that it rippled. A strange feeling suddenly surrounded her. It was extremely subtle. Who's your wife? Shen Manting retorted, but her voice was not loud and soon disappeared. Hearing her reaction, Shen Luoan laughed foolishly and said, "Come quickly. They've found me. If you don't come, I'll be drunk to death here." Old Shen, you're not being kind. You've only drunk a little and you're calling for help. The clear and loud voice was obviously much more sober than Shen Luoan. I'm at Yen Yun on Chongda Road. However, before she could hear more, the phone was hung up. Shen Manting looked at the baby in her arms and hesitated for a moment before she went to Shen Longyue's room. Knock. Knock. After a long time, someone opened the door. Mrs. Shen was sleepy. When she saw Shen Manting, she calmed down and asked, "What's wrong?" Shen Manting told her the whole story and then said, "Why don't you go and pick him up? Or you can ask Dad to go." Shen Manting was a little anxious and didn't notice how she addressed him. Mrs. Shen's face softened, but she remained calm and said, "He went out to socialize and was forced to drink. It's unreasonable for his parents to pick him up. How do you think he'll face his friends in the future? Of course you should go." Then she looked at the baby in her arms and said, "I'll look after the baby. You go." Mrs. Shen's words made sense, but Shen Manting still felt that something was wrong. After thinking about it, she nodded. She handed the baby to her and said worriedly, "It's almost time for the baby to drink milk. Give it to him in 10 minutes. Okay. Then I'll go and change first." Because she had just taken a shower, Shen Manting was wearing pajamas. Now that she was ready to go out, she went back to the nanny's room. She took out the clothes she bought today and picked out a dress. But after thinking about it, it was a dinner party after all, and the people drinking there were all men. What if someone was drunk and messed around? No way. She rummaged around and found a pantsuit that Shen Luoan had chosen for her. After putting it on, she felt much better. She put on her shoes, carried her bag, took a small comb and combed her hair before walking out. She took a taxi and soon arrived at Chongda Road. She told the driver about Misty Cloud, and the driver took her to Misty Cloud Dream. Yen Yun Ru Meng was a luxurious high-end entertainment venue, with restaurants and entertainment as one. She called Shen Luoan, but no one answered. She walked up in her high heels. When she made another call, she saw a familiar man from afar. He looked to be in his 30s or 40s. He was slightly plump and wore a pair of glasses. He looked quite gentle. But now his face was red and he looked a little drunk. "Lao Wu." Shen Manting walked over and called out, "Where's Shen Luoan?" Lao Wu looked up and saw Shen Manting. He found her familiar. After a while, he remembered who she was and said, "Oh, Manting. You've changed so much that I almost couldn't recognize you." Shen Manting could only smile and ask again, "Where is Shen Luoan?" "He's still in there. These people are too good at drinking. I can't beat them." Shen Manting waved his hand and looked like he was about to vomit. Shen Manting took a step back and frowned. Shen Manting took a rest for a while, then said drunkenly, "Let's go and save Shen." He stumbled forward and mumbled, "It's not the same, it's not the same." As soon as they entered the private room, there was a strong smell of cigarettes and alcohol. Someone was singing, and the table was full of good food and wine. Shen Luoan was lying on the table, holding a bottle of white wine in his hand. "Shen, your woman is here to pick you up," Shen Manting said in a loud voice. Shen Luoan immediately raised his head and saw Shen Manting from afar. He grinned and said, "She's here." As he said that, he supported himself with the bottle and tried to stand up. But his body went limp and he almost fell again. Shen Manting quickly went up and held him steadily. Shen Luoan slightly turned sideways and hugged her waist. Shen Manting was suddenly hugged, and her whole body tightened. Then, Shen Luoan buried his face in her gorgeous hair and inhaled deeply. Shen Manting's face turned red and she took a step back. She whispered anxiously, "What are you doing? There are so many people." "Hey, if you want to be intimate, go home." A fat man who looked like a boss waved his hand in disgust. "How much did you drink?" This genius can't hold his liquor well. Take him away. Shen Luo and didn't seem to hear it. He was a little intoxicated and said with a smile, I missed you so much. Shen Manting's face was a little hot. She pushed his face away and said, Let go. Shen Luo and didn't let go. He reached out and put his hand on her shoulder to help her stand up. How much did you drink? You're like this. Shen Manting frowned and dragged him up. Shen Luoen's feet were a little unstable, and then his whole body almost fell on top of her. He looked thin, but he was a man after all, and his weight was not light. Shen Manting staggered under his weight, but she soon straightened up and said angrily, Why did you drink so much? It was delicious. Hey, you're too fierce, Lao Wu laughed. Old Shen also has such a day. Women should be gentle. Although old Shen is easy to bully, don't bully your man like this. There are so many people here. You can go home and do whatever you want behind closed doors. Ha ha ha. You don't say. Maybe she looks fierce, but she is very gentle in the room. Otherwise, how could old Shen be defeated by her? Shen Manting's face flushed with embarrassment as they teased each other. She stopped talking and put Shen Luoen's hand on her shoulder. Then she carried him out of the room. The people in the private room continued to drink, laughing as they watched their backs. Shen Luoen was drunk. When he heard their words, the thirst in his heart became stronger. He glanced at Shen Manting's face. It was pink and very tempting. Shen Luoen's eyes were fixed on her. He blinked and looked at her, licking his lips. But soon he forced himself to turn his head, as if to hypnotize himself, and said, Let's go home. Shen Manting supported him and muttered, You can't drink. Why did you drink so much? I still have to serve you when we go home. You'll be in trouble if the baby is affected by the smell of alcohol. Shen Luoen chuckled. Shen Manting was puzzled by his laughter and asked, Where's the car? In the garage. -1 and -2. 2. When they arrived at the garage, Shen Manting held the key for a long time before she found the car. She helped him into the front passenger seat, then went to the driver's seat and buckled the seat belt for him. However, she accidentally met his hazy and blurred eyes. Shen Luoen licked his lips. In a flash, he reached out and pinched her chin. He slightly tilted his head and kissed her lips. It's the end of the month. Don't waste your monthly tickets. Give them to me. Chapter 2025. In an instant, Shen Manting's mouth was filled with the strong smell of alcohol and tobacco. She opened her eyes wide in disbelief. She subconsciously broke free from him, but as soon as she stretched out her hand and placed it on his chest, she was pushed back by Shen Luoen. Ugh! Shen Manting struggled uneasily and tried to push him away with both hands on his shoulders. However, Shen Luoen's arm not only did not loosen, but he squeezed it even tighter. Shen Manting frowned in pain. All the resistance and disgust in her heart broke out at this moment. She closed her mouth forcefully, and immediately her mouth was filled with the smell of blood. Shen Luoen frowned and looked at Shen Manting in front of him with a pair of amber eyes. He was a little confused and a little confused. Shen Manting frowned and used all her strength to push him away. Shen Luoen was pushed, and his head hit the car window. Bang! It was a clear and dull sound. Shen Manting retched and immediately opened the car door with her hands covering her mouth. She wiped her mouth, and blood mixed with saliva. Her mouth was still filled with the smell of alcohol and tobacco. It was so disgusting that it made her want to vomit. After resting for a while, nothing came out of his mouth. Shen Manting turned her head back. However, she found that Shen Luoen was still in the same position, motionless. She opened the car door and walked in. Shen Manting reached out and pushed Shen Luoen. Shen Luoen? But Shen Luoen was still motionless. It looked like he was asleep? Or did he just hit the car window and passed out? Shen Luoen? Shen Manting felt that something was wrong, and she pushed him hard. Still, there was no reaction. She reached out and raised his head. At a glance, she saw a bloody luster in the gap of his mouth. Startled, she immediately pulled out a tissue and wiped his mouth. The tissue was full of blood. Did she use too much force just now? Shen Manting's heart inexplicably surged with guilt. He was drunk, but she was sober. Maybe he didn't even know what he was doing. She tried to open his mouth, but his teeth were so tightly clenched that she couldn't open them. Shen Manting had to use the stupidest method to wipe his mouth. After a while, when the traces of blood had lessened, he started the car. She drove home and parked the car in the courtyard. Then, she got out of the car and helped him out. Shen Luoan was very heavy, but he was still conscious. His body was pressed against hers, and he knew that he had to move a few steps. He opened his eyes slightly and stared at Shen Manting. Shen Manting felt a little uncomfortable under his gaze. She glared at him and made him lean against the wall before pressing the doorbell. Mrs. Shen quickly came to open the door. Her hands were empty. The baby must have fallen asleep. When he saw Shen Luoan, he frowned and said, "Why did you drink so much? You know you can't drink." "Mom, help me make a glass of honey water to sober him up." Shen Manting carried him on her shoulder and resisted the urge to throw him down. Mrs. Shen quickly replied, "I'll help you get him inside first." Shen Luoan wasn't in a good state, but as soon as he entered the house, he seemed to be more clear-headed. "Go to sleep," Shen Luoan said in a drunken voice. I'll go take a shower first." Mrs. Shen panicked when she heard that. "How can you take a shower in such a state? Go lie down and sleep." "No, I can't. The baby is in there. I smell like alcohol. The baby will feel uncomfortable." Shen Luoan had already taken off his suit as he spoke. He let go of Shen Manting and stumbled into the room. Mrs. Shen hurried to hold him, but she was pushed away. Shen Manting watched from behind and felt angry. She said, "Why did you drink so much when you can't drink? Why are you acting like a drunkard now?" Shen Luoan looked back and said nothing. However, he suddenly stuck out his tongue and touched it. Shen Manting felt her heart skip a beat when she saw his action. She subconsciously glanced at Mrs. Shen and quickly went up to help Shen Luoan into the room. Shen Luoan didn't push her away. He was very cooperative. However, as soon as he entered the room, he closed the door. He turned around and pressed Shen Manting against the door. Shen Manting was shocked and said, "What are you doing?" Shen Luoan's amber eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of fog. When he heard Shen Manting's voice, he stared at her for a long time before he stuck out his tongue and said, "My tongue hurts." His voice was muffled, but his tongue clearly appeared in front of Shen Manting. Shen Manting glanced at it and squinted at him. She then said, "What does it have to do with me? I just dreamed that you bit me." Shen Luoan looked at her with a face full of accusation. Shen Manting glared at him and pushed him away angrily. She shouted, "Don't you know what you've done? How dare you criticize me?" Shen Luoan looked dissatisfied and said with a straight face, "You can't." Shen Manting was even more puzzled. She wanted to push him away, but Shen Luoan seemed to be very sober. She couldn't push him away at all. "Go away." Shen Manting was annoyed and shouted in a low voice, "The child is still sleeping. Don't force me to quarrel with you." When Shen Luoan heard this, his drunken eyes became even redder. He looked at her with a few strands of tears in his eyes. Shen Manting had never seen Shen Luoan like this. She was shocked and hurriedly shouted, "What are you doing?" However, Shen Luoan seemed to be in great pain and pressed down. Shen Manting was even more shocked. Before she could react, Shen Luoan's face was pressed against her shoulder. "I just dreamed that you kissed me." Shen Luoan's voice was hazy with drunkenness. His face was pressed against her shoulder, so his voice was also muffled. However, Shen Manting heard it clearly. She pulled her face and pushed his face away with her hand. She said angrily, "Go away." "No." Shen Luoan didn't go away. He slightly pressed his body against her and said in a choked nasal voice, "I miss you so much. I won't go away." Shen Manting's heart fluttered, and she was momentarily stunned. Shen Luoan just lay there quietly, his big hand grabbing the clothes around her waist. He bent over and lowered his head. He looked a little embarrassed, reeking of alcohol. He didn't look like Shen Luoan at all. Shen Manting looked down at him and gently pushed him away. "You can take a bath now." "I don't want to take a bath." Shen Luoan's voice was low and sounded a little coquettish. "You were the one who said you wanted to take a bath just now." Shen Manting felt annoyed. "Get up." Chapter 2026. Shen Manting's voice was low and full of grievance. Shen Manting's heart ached. She subconsciously looked at the baby lying quietly in the crib. The baby and the baby were both in the room. The baby was lying quietly, but the big one was holding on to her tightly. "Don't go," Shen Luoen's voice was muffled with a strong nasal sound. "Stay, the baby and I need you." Shen Manting felt a surge of sadness from the back of her head to the tip of her nose. Her eyes were dry and she almost shed tears. "Don't go, don't go." Shen Manting raised her hand and gently hugged him. She whispered, "Go to sleep first. Don't go." Shen Luoen seemed to be drunk. He grabbed her clothes and murmured with his head down. He only knew how to repeat this sentence and these few words. "Let go of me first. Don't go." "Shen Luoen, don't go." Shen Manting's eyes were slightly red. She hugged him and whispered, "Don't go." Shen Luo, and seemed to have gotten the answer he wanted. Then, his body loosened and he completely fell on top of her body. Shen Manting was startled. She cried out in alarm and hurriedly supported him. It took her a lot of effort to half support and half drag him to the bed. His body reeked of alcohol. Shen Manting took off his shoes and then began to unbutton his shirt. She poured warm water for him to wipe his hands and face. Finally, after unbuckling his belt, she stuffed him into the innermost part of the bed. Shen Luoen was snoring slightly. It seemed that he was sleeping soundly. Shen Manting sighed heavily. After going to her room to change into a set of pajamas, she brought in the honey water that Mrs. Shen had prepared. After pulling him a few times and finding that she couldn't move him, Shen Manting gave up the idea of pouring him water. She took off her shoes and lay on the bed. She fell asleep in a daze. In the middle of the night, the baby didn't wake her up, but she was awakened by a suffocating feeling. Shen Luo hugged her tightly in his arms. He used a lot of strength. Shen Manting gasped uncomfortably. She pried his hand away and shouted, "Shen Luoen, let go." Shen Luoen's hand was pulled away, and Shen Manting immediately flipped him over. Shen Manting heard the baby crying. She had no choice but to get up and turn on the lights. She fed the baby milk and changed his diaper. When she was about to turn off the lights, she suddenly saw Shen Luoen on the bed staring at her. Shen Manting's heart thumped and she took a step back. When he saw that it was Shen Luoen, he heaved a sigh of relief. Then he said angrily, "Are you crazy? It's so silent." Shen Luoen seemed to have lost his soul. He stared at her blankly. Then he got up and said, "I want to go to the toilet." "Go." "I don't have the strength." Shen Luoen sat on the edge of the bed and waited for her to help him up. Shen Manting's eyebrows twitched. When she saw his innocent expression, she wished she could bite him to death. Suppressing his anger, he walked forward. With her help, Shen Luoen stood up and stumbled to the bathroom. Shen Manting helped him to the door and then turned around. The sound of running water could be heard. Shen Manting closed her eyes in disgust and walked out of the bathroom. She didn't know how long it had been, but there was no movement inside. Shen Manting sat on the edge of the bed and shouted, "Shen Luoen." No one answered. Then, she stood up and looked inside. Unexpectedly, Shen Luoen was sitting in the bathtub with his eyes closed. It seemed that he had fallen asleep. Shen Manting couldn't bear it anymore. She covered her face and scolded, "Damn it!" She walked forward and turned on the shower head angrily. Then, she poured the shower head on his head. Shen Luoen seemed to be startled. His whole body twitched. Then, he opened his eyes and looked at her. He was confused and hazy. There seemed to be some doubt in his eyes. Shen Manting said angrily, "Get up and go back to sleep." Shen Luoen's hair was wet. When he heard this, he wiped his hair in confusion. Then, he turned his head and took a bottle of shampoo and squeezed it twice. Shen Manting suddenly had a bad feeling. "What are you doing?" As expected, Shen Luoen didn't say anything and rubbed the shampoo on his head. Oh my God! Shen Manting was going crazy. She immediately reached out and pulled his hand down. She exclaimed, "Shen Luoen." Shen Luoen didn't seem to notice anything wrong. He asked in confusion, "What?" Shen Manting was extremely sleepy. When she saw his confused look, her temper seemed to be blocked. She couldn't say anything. She had no choice but to squat down and turn on the hot water. She cussed in a low voice, "I really owe you." She washed the shampoo off his head and squeezed some shampoo into his hair. After washing his hair clean, She pulled the shampoo over. She rubbed it hard on his body as if she was taking revenge. Shen Luoan frowned and pulled her hand. He said in a low and aggrieved voice, "It hurts." He looked as if Shen Manting had done something unforgivable. Shen Manting's heart suddenly softened. She involuntarily loosened her grip. She reached out and unbuttoned his pants. She said angrily, "Take it off yourself." Shen Luoan tugged twice. Then, he clumsily pulled his pants down to his knees and stopped moving. Shen Manting rolled her eyes at the sky. Then she roared, "Are you King drunk or stupid?" Her voice was so loud that the baby woke up in fright. Sobbing sounds could be heard. Shen Manting was shocked. Then she turned around and glared at him. "Go to hell." She threw the disheveled hair on him. Then, she stood up and walked in the direction of the baby. The baby opened his eyes helplessly and was at a loss. He looked a little like Shen Luoan just now. Shen Manting's heart softened slightly. At the same time, she felt very annoyed. She patiently coaxed the baby to sleep and gently put him back. Chapter 2027. Shen Luoan fell flat on his back. The towel fell to the ground, and she lay down on the bed. He didn't even try to hide it. Shen Manting walked over and glanced at him. But it seemed to be an illusion. She blushed and immediately looked away. Pervert! Shen Manting covered him with the blanket, turned off the light, and lay down. Shen Manting was exhausted. As soon as she lay down, she closed her eyes and soon fell asleep. She slept with her back to Shen Luoan. But in the middle of the night, she didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that something was rubbing against her. She woke up with a start and turned around. Shen Luoan was lying quietly on the bed. His hand was pressed against the blanket on his waist. Shen Manting yawned and then turned to face him and continued to sleep. Nothing happened until dawn. During this period, the baby woke up once, but it was quickly resolved. When Shen Manting got up, Shen Luoan was gone. The sound of running water came from the bathroom. Soon, Shen Luoan came out in his home clothes, knocking his head. When he saw her, he frowned and said, "Did you hit me last night? Why does my head hurt so much?" "You were the one who drank the wine," Shen Manting said angrily. She got up and said, "I really owe you. Not only do I have to serve your son, but I also have to serve you." "Nonsense." Shen Luoan walked over and took her hand to touch his head. "Look, it's swollen." Shen Manting touched his head. It was true. She suddenly remembered that when she threw the shower head last night, she seemed to have thrown it a little hard. How could it be so coincidental that it hit him on the head? She felt a little guilty, but she still said confidently, "It's not my fault." Indeed, it was not her fault. He did it himself. Shen Luoan was skeptical. He stuck out his tongue and said, "Tongue, you bit me." Bull**T. Shen Manting denied. "You bit yourself. How is that possible?" Shen Luoan obviously didn't believe her. Shen Manting turned around and said loudly, "You're the one who bit your own tongue. Why are you blaming me for everything?" "I clearly remember you biting me." Shen Luoan was a little unconvinced. He stepped forward and said, "What did you do when I was drunk? Tell me now." Shen Manting ignored him and walked out the door. Shen Luoan stared at her from behind, his head throbbing with pain. What happened last night was intermittent, so he couldn't remember it clearly, but he didn't forget everything either. Why did he feel like he had suffered a great loss? This feeling was intense, but it felt pretty good. Shen Manting went back to the nanny's room to wash up. But when she looked into the mirror, she felt a little strange. "What if you don't want me and the child anymore?" His heart palpitated. She didn't know if he was talking nonsense because he was drunk, or if he was telling the truth because he was drunk. Shen Manting washed her face. Her mind was filled with the image of him sitting in the bathtub in a daze. What a fool. Nanny, he had already prepared dinner by the time she got changed. Shen Manting yawned and went back into the house to carry the baby out. Shen Luoan was still sleeping. The more she looked at him, the more annoyed she became. When she passed by, she glared at him resentfully. Shen Luoan seemed to feel it and sat up immediately. He got up and walked out of the room in his slippers. He knocked his head and said, "Nanny, help me cook some soup to sober up." Nanny he glanced at him and then at Shen Manting. She smiled and said, "Wait a minute." After finishing the work in her hands, she went to the kitchen to cook some soup to sober up. Shen Manting sat on the sofa with the baby in her arms and kept yawning. Shen Luo glanced at her and sat in front of her. He said angrily, "Didn't I let you sleep last night? You're so sleepy." Shen Manting glanced at him and became even more annoyed. She said, "How dare you say that? Think about what you did last night." Chapter 2028. However, he suddenly recalled his long-awaited reaction last night. Vaguely, he seemed to be hugging a pillow or something and rubbing it a few times. Could it be? Looking at Shen Manting's expression, Shen Luo suddenly had a bad feeling. Could it be that the person he rubbed against last night was actually the same person? He felt a little strange, but when he saw Shen Manting's angry expression, he deliberately looked away and said, "Did I kick you off the bed?" Nanny he and Mrs. Shen laughed. Shen Longyue sat at the dining table and looked over. Shen Manting was annoyed by their laughter. She frowned and said, "How dare you say that? Why did you imitate others when you can't drink? Not only were you drunk, but you also lay in the bathtub and refused to get up. If I hadn't sacrificed my sleep time to wake you up, you would have slept in the bathtub all night." After being reminded, Shen Luo seemed to have some recollection of it. It seemed he was really drunk. Shen Luo felt guilty, but he still refused to admit his mistake. He looked at Shen Manting's face and snorted coldly. "If that's the case, why don't you let me sleep in the bathtub? It's cool and comfortable to sleep in the bathtub." Shen Manting felt that he was unreasonable. She stood up with the baby in her arms and decided to ignore him. Shen Luo looked at her and started eating the orange. Nanny he quickly cooked the hangover soup. When she came over, she glared at Shen Luo and said, "Can't you say something nice?" "What can I say?" Shen Luo was amused. He looked at the bowl of hot soup and said, "I have a headache. Help me get some painkillers. You'll be fine after drinking some hangover soup. You can lie down later." Nanny he wiped her hands and said, "Eat your breakfast after you're done. Drinking too much is not good for your stomach." "Got it." Shen Luo picked up the bowl and drank it with a frown. After a while, he went to the table. Shen Manting had already put the baby back. After a night of playing, her stomach was already growling. But when she was about to eat breakfast, she saw Shen Luo sitting at the table. She had originally walked out of the room, but she turned back. Shen Luo frowned when he saw this, but he didn't say anything. After eating a little, he got up and went back to his room to lie down like a corpse. Shen Manting was packing the baby's clothes into a pile. When she saw Shen Luo enter, she carried them to the next room and placed them in the disinfectant cabinet. Shen Luo could tell. This woman is hiding from me again. Feeling unhappy, she covered her head with the blanket and closed her eyes. But he couldn't fall asleep no matter what. He tossed and turned in bed for a while, trying to recall the scene from last night. But as soon as he thought about it, his head started to hurt. Motherf ****. It turned out that there really was such a thing as blacking out after drinking. Chapter 2029. Shen Manting. Shen Luo looked at her and suddenly called out. Shen Manting ignored him. She turned on the switch of the small cabinet and put down the small curtain that blocked out the radiation. "I'm calling you. Didn't you hear me?" "Yes." Shen Manting turned around and put away the diapers. "What do you want?" "Come here." "Why?" "Because you took advantage of me last night." Shen Luo stood up and walked over to her. "I remember I was wearing a lot of clothes last night. When I woke up this morning, I didn't even have my underwear. Did you take advantage of me?" Shen Manting immediately glanced at him with a look of disgust. "Can you be more shameless? I waited on you for a long time last night. You didn't get up from the bathtub and even rubbed the shower gel on your head. Don't you remember that?" Shen Luo immediately frowned. How could such a thing happen? Impossible. He couldn't have done such a thing. It was impossible. Shen Manting twitched the corner of her mouth and turned away. "Then why didn't I wear any clothes? I was kind. I helped you take a bath and took off your dirty clothes. My underwear is gone too. Do you like wearing underwear when you take a bath?" Shen Manting looked at him strangely. You have to be content. I haven't even questioned you yet. Are you trying to settle the score after drinking? Shen Luoan looked at her and frowned even deeper. He said seriously, I think you're wronging me. Shen Manting was speechless. She ignored him and turned to leave. Shen Luoan looked at her and felt bored. His head was throbbing with pain, so he turned around and lay down. He slept all the way until the afternoon. The baby was not on the small bed. Shen Luoan yawned. He was undoubtedly in a much better state. After washing up, he walked out and found Nanny He watching TV with the baby in her arms. Shen Luoan frowned. Where is she? She went to take a nap. She didn't sleep much last night. Look at her. The dark circles under her eyes are comparable to those of a panda. She's not in the room. Where did she sleep? In her room, of course. Where is the nanny's room? Nanny He pointed in that direction and said, You're the one who's making a scene when you're drunk. It's not easy for Miss to come back. If you drive her away again, let's see how you're going to lure her back. Shen Luoan didn't say anything, but he was obviously unhappy. It's not like there's no bed for her to sleep in. Who is she trying to impress by sleeping in the nanny's room? When Nanny He heard this, she shook her head and clicked her tongue. Didn't she agree to come back because you treated her as a nanny? Isn't it only right for her to sleep in the nanny's room now? She took care of you and the baby last night. It's time for her to rest. Is the nanny's room good to sleep in? It's hard to sleep. It's humid and stuffy. Auntie Zhang complained about it before. It's really uncomfortable. Chapter 20:30. Bang! The chair next to him fell to the ground. The baby was so scared that he twitched. Then, he started to cry with a red face. Nanny He was also shocked by the sudden movement. She opened her eyes and peeked at Shen Luoan's expression. Shen Luoan's expression was very ugly. He glanced at the crying baby and went back to the room with a sullen face. What? Sign a contract? Shen Manting was shocked. What contract? Do you even need to ask? Shen Luoan slapped the paper lazily and said impatiently, It's such a big labor contract. Can't you see it? Shen Manting slapped the paper hard and took the labor contract. She muttered, Is it necessary? You make it sound so serious. Shen Luoan heard her muttering and said, You spoil her. Her temper is getting worse. Shen Manting didn't say anything. She looked at the contract and said, You're giving me a salary of 20,000 yuan? How can a nanny get such a high salary? I like you. I'm willing to give you a higher salary. Shen Luoan glanced at her with a natural expression. Shen Manting's heartbeat quickened when she heard his words. She felt a little uncomfortable and lowered her head to continue reading the contract. 10 years? Shen Manting frowned. No way. Why? Shen Luoan was a little dissatisfied. Are you not satisfied with the salary? Shen Manting frowned. If I work here for 10 years, how can I find a partner? I'm only 28 years old and I still have to find a partner. Do you want me to find one around here? Don't pretend to be young. Shen Luoan felt a burst of irritation and corrected her. You're already 29 years old and you've already given birth to a child. You still want to find a partner? Don't you have any shame? Shen Manting laughed when she heard this. Can't I find a partner after I've given birth? Is there any law? You call this shameless? There are plenty of people selling their bodies on the streets. You want to compare yourself to them? Shen Luoan's eyes were full of contempt. How can you compare? At least they have a good figure and look. Go and look in the mirror. Look at yourself. How can you compare yourself? Shen Manting was even more furious. She flipped the contract over and said, I'm just a normal human being. I have normal needs. I'm different from you. I can live the rest of my life alone. I won't sign this contract. Shen Luoan's face darkened. He looked at the contract that had been swept to the ground and said, Your temper is getting worse. Who would have a good temper when facing your face all day long? Am I not good looking? Heh. Don't you have any idea if it's good or not? Shen Luoan's expression darkened. He stood up and reached out to grab her hand. What do you want? I'll satisfy you. Shen Manting's heart skipped a beat when she felt his tug. Let go of me. However, Shen Luoan refused to let go of her. Instead, He reached out and wrapped his arms around her waist. Whether it's material, psychological, or physical, I can satisfy you. Shen Luoan's eyes darkened. It seemed to be enshrouded in a layer of unknown emotions, looking at her quietly and deeply. Shen Manting felt her heart tremble, and her face darkened. Let go of me. Shen Manting, I'm good enough for you. You have to be grateful. Shen Manting was so angry that she laughed. She cursed. F*CKU. You're shameless. Get lost. I don't want to stay here anymore. Chapter 2031. Shen Manting suddenly stopped struggling. She gasped and looked at him. Shen Luoan didn't let go. He looked at her without saying anything. After a long time, Shen Manting said, You can't satisfy me, Shen Luoan. What do you mean? Shen Luoan narrowed his eyes and moved his palm up along her waistline. Slowly, slowly. The strange feeling made Shen Manting tremble. Her body was slightly stiff. Shen Luoan could clearly feel his palm rubbing her second forbidden area. Like this? Shen Manting felt conflicted. She closed her eyes and turned her head away, trying to push him away. But Shen Luoan didn't let her go. Instead, he picked her up. Shen Manting screamed. In the blink of an eye, she was pressed on the bed. The familiar and strange feeling made Shen Manting panic. She screamed, Shen Luoan, let me go. He struggled with all his might with his hands and legs, as if he had used up all his strength. His eyes were slightly red, and he was hysterical. She was afraid. When he realized this, Shen Luoan immediately let go of her. Shen Manting immediately scrambled out of bed and staggered down the stairs. Looking at Shen Luoan, her eyes were red and she was short of breath. But soon, she opened the door and ran out. Shen Luoan turned over and looked at the door. He suddenly felt a deep sense of frustration. Then, he couldn't contain his anger. He picked up the contract and quickly tore it into pieces. Then, he threw it into the trash can. The shredded paper hit the edge of the trash can and fell to the ground. Mrs. Shen was holding the baby outside. When she heard what sounded like an argument inside, her heart tightened with anxiety. After a while, she saw Shen Manting running out in a panic. It didn't look right. Manting. However, Shen Manting didn't stop and quickly rushed out of the door. Mrs. Shen was slightly shocked. When she was about to enter the door, the baby suddenly cried as if he had a premonition. She opened the door and walked in while coaxing the baby. At a glance, she saw that Shen Luoan's face was dark to the extreme. What's wrong? Mrs. Shen walked in and was a little worried. Did you quarrel with Manting? Shen Luoan saw his mother and sighed heavily. He sat on the bed and held his head in his hands, feeling hopeless and helpless. He sighed. Mom, what do I have to do to make her stay? Mrs. Shen sighed softly when she heard this. The baby in his arms cried uneasily. Shen Luoan, who was lying on the bed, became more and more agitated. He reached out for the baby and said, Give it to me. Madame Shen refused to give it to him. She turned around and said, The child is crying because of you. Please don't hit the child. When did I ever hit a child? Shen Luoan was even more agitated. My temper isn't that bad. Is it? Mrs. Shen laughed when she heard this. Look at your temper. Who in the family can have a worse temper than you? Grandma has quite a temper. Grandma is used to being free and unfettered all her life. Of course she has a temper. Manting's temper is worse. That's because you forced me to do it. Do you think I don't know about your bad temper and unforgiving mouth? Mrs. Shen held the infant in her arms and looked at him with a reproachful expression. Didn't you just ask me what I can do to make her stay? She couldn't leave, so she naturally stayed. Shen Luoan. Wasn't he just spouting nonsense? Chapter 2032. Just this question alone was enough to put him in a difficult position. Shen Luoan scratched his head in frustration before standing up and asking, Where did she go? Mrs. Shen glanced at him and snorted. He ran out a long time ago. Do you think you can find him now? Upon hearing this, Shen Luoan immediately picked up his cell phone and dialed Shen Manting's number. Soon, Shen Manting's cell phone rang from inside the room. The ringtone was pleasing to the ear, but it made Shen Luoan even more agitated. Shen Luoan tossed his phone aside and stormed out in a huff. When he opened the door, it was pitch black outside. Only the streetlights were dimly lit. It was already late at night. Shen Manting was still wearing simple and comfortable home clothes. She didn't bring her cell phone, let alone money or identification card. It was already so late, and she had nothing on her. Where could she go? Shen Luoan furrowed his brows and rushed out, shouting, "Shen Manting!" At this time, she shouldn't have gone far. Shen Luoan heard the sound of insects in the yard. He ran out, looked around, and finally ran to the left. But after running back and forth for a long time, he still couldn't find her. Shen Luoan felt a little defeated. He stopped and stood by the side of the road, panting. His mind spun quickly as he carefully recalled the places she might have been to, or the route she might have taken when she was in a bad mood. After thinking for a long time, Shen Luoan located 3 locations. First, a bar. However, she didn't have any money right now, so it was impossible for her to go to such a place to have fun. The second was to go to a friend's house. She did not have many friends. One of them was her former classmate, and the other was a famous socialite in the capital. It was impossible for her to be a socialite. It was very likely that she would go to her classmate's house. However, she didn't even have a phone on her, so she could only put this possibility aside for now. The last possibility was, she was still nearby. She hadn't gone far. Shen Manting was a fake artistic youth. When she was in a bad mood, she would probably play on the swing. Shen Luoan was confused by his sudden thought. Inexplicably, he thought of the swing in the park, the place where children often climbed up and down. Not to mention adults, even children wouldn't have enough to play with. For some reason, Shen Luoan walked in the direction of the park. Under the dim streetlights, the swing in the park was empty. There was no one there at all. Shen Luoan suddenly felt that he was a little funny, but at the same time, he was greatly disappointed. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a shadow on the basketball court in the distance. Xiao shrank under the backboard, her back to the lights, casting a long shadow. Shen Luoan was slightly short-sighted, so he didn't see who it was. However, he still subconsciously lightened his footsteps and walked over. Shen Manting leaned against the pillar under the backboard. The cold touch made her feel even more at a loss. Inexplicably, he felt a little sad. Tears streamed down her cheeks uncontrollably, and she felt extremely aggrieved. He buried his face between his legs and whimpered softly. However, he suddenly heard faint footsteps behind him. She looked back and saw that it was Shen Luoan. Shen Manting was startled. She immediately got up and bounced back subconsciously. Seeing this, Shen Luoan stopped and said, "Let's talk." The conflict in her heart grew deeper and deeper. Chapter 2033. Shen Luoan felt a pang in his heart when he saw Shen Manting retreating. Just like before, she seemed to be afraid of him. If you don't want to sign it, then don't sign it. Let's go back and have a good talk. Shen Luoan looked at her and spoke very slowly. It was as if he was careful with every word he said. Shen Manting stared at him from afar and didn't say anything. Shen Luoan felt even more hurt. He looked at her from afar and said softly, "I know that sometimes my mouth is a little bad, but actually, you're still very good-looking." Shen Luoan felt a little ashamed to say this. A feeling he had never felt before surrounded him. He quietly took a step closer and said, "It's true. Both your face and your figure are better than before. The reason why I said that was because I didn't want you to be compared to those people." Shen Manting was moved by his words, but the tears in her eyes couldn't help but flow down. How could she not know? This guy had always been like this. But she couldn't stand it anymore. It was not only because of his unparalleled bad mouth, but also because of the indelible things he had done to her. "Manting, go back first. Mom is taking care of the baby now. Mom has to go back to the hospital tomorrow. Think about it, if she's not in a good mood during the operation, how guilty would it be?" Shen Luoan slowly approached her. "Shen Luoan," Shen Manting looked at him with a pair of clear eyes with a pair of desolate light. "Do you know that I've always hated you?" Shen Luoan was stunned and didn't say anything. "I used to think that you were a big brother that I could rely on, a big tree that could shelter me from the wind and rain," Shen Manting said in a choked voice. "But I never thought that I would have a relationship with you." I thought that I would be able to endure it, but who knew that you would become even worse? Shen Luoan was slightly shocked and looked at her in disbelief. When you said that you would marry me to O Ming, I was so happy. I thought, I can finally leave you. I don't have to be this incestuous person anymore. God knows how scared I was when I faced my parents and grandma every day, when they treated me like a daughter or a granddaughter. I'm afraid that they'll call me a slut. They brought me back and treated me like their daughter and descendant, but I've become a slut who seduced the man they're so proud of. Do you know how it feels? I live in guilt every day. At that time, Yi Yuyu was still at home. I called her sister-in-law over and over again, but did she know that her husband was in my bed every night? Shen Manting was on the verge of a breakdown. She clutched her chest and said, I've had enough. I've finally escaped. I thought that by giving birth to the baby, I could threaten you and force you to give me a sum of money so that I could run away. As she spoke, she swallowed a mouthful of saliva and stared at him fixedly. But I can't do it. I can't bear to part with the baby. I can't bear to use him as a bargaining chip for my freedom. But I'm not willing to be imprisoned by you and raped by you. Raping her. Such a blatant word was exposed right in front of his eyes. For a moment, Shen Luoan couldn't accept it. Shen Manting's voice trembled as she sobbed. Her thin body was like a piece of cardboard, and she was on the verge of collapsing. Chapter 2034. In your eyes, I'm nothing more than a sex slave. Shen Manting looked at him with tears streaming down her face. You've always loved Yi Yuyu, but you hated Yi Yuyu for so many years because of Guan Kui. I feel so sad for you. Shen Luo unclenched his fists and glared at Shen Manting. He gritted his teeth and said, Shen Manting. Shen Manting chuckled and reached out to wipe her tears. Why? You want to hit me? Shen Luoan walked quickly towards her. Her expression changed, and she immediately said, Shen Luoan, what do you want? However, Shen Luoan remained silent. Shen Manting's heart was filled with panic. What did he want to do? Her body reacted faster than her anger. She turned around and ran. The park was huge, and Shen Manting stumbled as she walked. Stop. He didn't expect her to have such a big reaction. I won't hit you. Stop. But Shen Manting wouldn't stop. Her footsteps quickened, and her body leaned forward slightly as she ran. Shen Luoan was very distressed. Shen Manting ran very fast. His figure was light and agile, and he disappeared into the bushes in a few steps. Shen Luoan felt a headache coming on and shouted, Wait a minute. I'll agree to anything you say. Manting, I never thought that you would have such thoughts. Wait a minute. Shen Manting could clearly hear the voice behind her, and her heart trembled slightly. But his footsteps did not stop. Soon, he was out of the road. After running for some time, she suddenly heard Shen Luoan's voice shouting, Get out of the way! Paw the sound of a long car horn. Shen Manting paused and turned to look at him. The glaring light immediately burned her eyes to the point of pain. He subconsciously narrowed his eyes. When the sports car crashed into her, Shen Manting had a thought in her mind. It's time to put an end to this. Shen Luoan clearly saw the car crash. His pupils shrank and he shouted, Shen Manting! A voice that was on the verge of collapse came from not far away. Shen Manting heard a crisp sound coming from her body. In an instant, a tearing pain spread throughout her entire body. So painful. Was he finally going to die? Mrs. Shen finally managed to coax the baby to sleep. Just as she walked out of the door, she suddenly heard the baby crying loudly. This kind of crying came too suddenly, and Shen Furen was caught off guard and jumped in fright. She hurriedly went forward and picked up the baby. Her heart ached for him as she gently coaxed him. However, the baby's cry this time was different. His little face was flushed red, and his little fists were waving in the air. No matter how she coaxed, hugged, or fed him, he couldn't stop. Mrs. Shen was so anxious that she was about to cry. This was the first time she had sat on the sofa with a baby in her arms, feeling lost. Why aren't they back yet? Mrs. Shen stomped her feet in anger. She picked up her phone and dialed Shen Luoan's number. Chapter 2035. What's wrong? Mrs. Shen had a bad feeling about this. She had watched Shen Luoan grow up, but she had never seen him like this. You have to tell me what's wrong, Mrs. Shen said sternly. Otherwise, I'll track your cell phone signal to find you. It's nothing. Don't ask. Rest early. Shen Luo and hung up the phone. The more Mrs. Shen thought about it, the more she felt that something was wrong. But the baby cried harder and harder, and Mrs. Shen was confused. She quickly picked him up and comforted him slowly. But the feeling of being kept in the dark was very uncomfortable. Shen Manting was seriously injured. Her left arm was fractured in 3 places, and her right leg was severely abraded. Her cheeks were also blood-stained, and the deep and shallow marks were shocking. The most serious injury was on her head. Her head was severely injured, and there was bleeding in many places. Her life was in danger. Shen Luo and almost couldn't stand when he heard the diagnosis. His hands trembled as he looked at the surgical consent letter. After signing it, he couldn't help but sit on the chair in front of the emergency room. He grabbed his hair with his blood-stained hands and cried in despair and grief. I'm sorry. A man in his 30s or 40s stood beside him and sobbed regretfully. I'm sorry, Luan. I drank a little, and I thought there would be no one around. Shen Luoan had already lost his strength, but at this moment, he suddenly stood up when he heard this. He stared at him with bloodshot eyes and punched him hard in the face. Zhou Xinghui was in pain and took a step back. Luoan. Ah! Shen Luoan strode forward and kicked him hard on the body. Zhou Xinghui was kicked to the ground. Before he could react, Shen Luoan had already straddled him, and his fists were like hail, falling heavily. Why did you drink? Why did you drive? Why didn't you look at the road? Zhou Xinghui didn't fight back, nor did he resist. After a while, his face was covered in blood. There were many people in the corridor of the emergency room, and the passing nurses exclaimed, That's enough! Someone, pull them away! Why, Zhou Xinghui? What do I owe you? You hurt my woman like this. It was as if Shen Luoan had completely lost his mind. He attacked mercilessly. When he was pulled away, Zhou Xinghui had already fainted. The blood on his face was mixed with tears, and his face was filled with guilt. Shen Longyue was suddenly informed by the hospital staff that Shen Manting was in trouble. He rushed to the hospital in a hurry. However, she did not expect to receive news that Shen Luo and had seriously injured someone and rendered them unconscious. She rushed to the emergency room and saw Shen Luo and sitting at the door from afar. His face was expressionless as he sat at the door, as if he had lost his soul. His home clothes were stained with blood, and he was wearing slippers. Shen Longyue's heart sank. Luoan. Shen Luoan tilted his head slightly. His gray eyes were deathly still. When he saw his father, his eyes trembled and he called out, Dad! What's wrong with Manting? When Shen Luoan was asked this question, he suddenly felt as if his sore spot had been poked. He couldn't help but feel guilty and remorseful, and his eyes reddened. Shen Luoan had always been calm. Ever since he became sensible, she had never seen him like this. Chapter 2036. Shen Longyue's heart sank when the nurse told him about Shen Manting's condition. The nurse saw his gloomy expression and asked curiously, Director, is the person inside your room? Shen Longyue glanced at her and sighed softly. My daughter-in-law. The nurse's eyes were full of sympathy and distress when she heard this. She saw the man with tears on his face at the door. There was no doubt that he was the son of the director. She comforted him and left quickly. Shen Longyue sat down beside Shen Luo and silently sat with him. The father and son sat at the door for 10 hours. Shen Longyue and Shen Luo kept their eyes open and staring at the door of the operating room. They didn't even yawn or take a nap. Finally, the door of the operating room opened. The chief surgeon opened the door and was stunned when he saw Shen Longyue. Director? Shen Luo immediately got up and grabbed the chief surgeon's clothes. How is the person inside? Shen Longyue also came over and said, This is my son, and the woman inside is my daughter-in-law. How is she now? The chief surgeon was silent for a moment and seemed to be thinking. Then he said, She's not in good condition. Although she has received a blood transfusion, her injuries are too serious. Her limbs are broken, and she has lost blood in many parts of her brain. The patient has been in a coma for a long time. It's hard to say whether she will wake up or not. Shen Luoan's face instantly turned pale. He clutched his surgical gown tightly and shouted angrily, "What do you mean?" "Luowen." Shen Longyue pulled him back. "Listen to him first. Little Qin. Has she passed the critical period?" Dr. Qin shook his head and said, "Not for the time being. I've given her medicine, and there may be complications within 24 hours. She has to stay in the ICU for observation. If she can survive these 24 hours, she may survive." Shen Luowen was even more furious when he heard this. He roared, "What do you mean by she may survive?" Dr. Qin looked at him and sighed softly. "Her injuries are too serious. If her vital signs can be stabilized, then she may not die." These vague and heartless words were so cruel that Shen Luowen trembled. She glared at him with bloodshot eyes and said, "If she stabilizes, can she wake up?" Dr. Qin was silent for a moment and looked at Shen Longyue. "Director, you know." Shen Longyue's eyes were already red. He supported Shen Luowen and said in a choked voice, "Luowen, go and rest first." Tell me. Shen Luowen could no longer stand. He was half collapsed and half standing. His voice was almost pleading. Stubble had appeared on his originally clean and refined face. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with blood and tears, making him look particularly miserable and ferocious. Dr. Qin couldn't bear it, but he looked at Shen Longyue and said, "Even if he survives, there's a high possibility that he'll become a vegetable." Shen Luowen felt as though he had been struck by lightning. His body stiffened and his mind went blank. There was a high possibility that he would end up in a vegetative state. Shen Luowen collapsed in despair and cried out, "It's impossible. It's impossible." Shen Longyue was heartbroken and desperate. He pulled Shen Luowen and cried in a low voice, "Shen Luowen, stand up." Chapter 2037. Shen Longyue felt a dull pain in his heart. He had high hopes for his son since he was a child. Shen Luowen was also very promising. No matter what he did it well. Shen Luowen never understood what he was thinking about when it came to love. When Guan Kui committed suicide because of him, he didn't shed a single tear. Now, Shen Manting was in trouble, and he was in this state. Shen Longyue suddenly hated Shen Manting. He hated her for not living up to his expectations. He hated her for getting hurt so badly. Looking at his son, Shen Longyue closed his eyes. "Go back first. Your son is still waiting for you to come home." Shen Luowen heard that and whispered, "Yes, my son is still waiting for me." She took Shen Longyue's hand and was about to get up. However, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head. All of a sudden, his feet slipped, and his whole body fell straight down. Shen Longyue was shocked. "Luowen?" When he checked again, Shen Luowen had already fainted. Shen Luowen was unconscious for a day and a night. The Shen family was in a mess. Shen Jilia and Yi Qianqian had just finished their wedding in Yun Town when they heard the bad news. When the couple hurried back to their home in the capital, they heard the cries of the baby. Mrs. Shen looked haggard. When she saw her son and daughter-in-law return, she couldn't help but cry. "You're finally back." Yi Qianqian's tears fell. She rushed forward and called out, "Mom!" Shen Jilia saw her and didn't say a word. He reached out and took the baby. The baby had obviously cried for a long time. His voice was hoarse, and his face was pink. Coming. Nanny." He quickly came out with a bottle in her hand. When she saw Shen Jilia, she handed it to him. "Feed the baby first." Mrs. Shen sat on the sofa and wailed. She hugged Yi Qianqian and couldn't stop. Yi Qianqian's heart felt like it was being corroded by thousands of ants. She gently patted her back and whispered, "Don't cry. Don't cry, Mom." Although that was what she said, she cried even harder. Shen Jilia didn't say a word. He carried the baby back to his room. His heart was heavy. He called Shen Longyue, and the call was quickly picked up. However, his voice sounded very tired. "Jilia." "Dad." Shen Jilia's expression was solemn. "Is brother awake?" "Not yet." "Where's Sister Manting?" Shen Longyue did not reply. He sighed and said, "Take good care of your mother and the baby. I'll inform you when Manting wakes up. I'll leave the baby with Qianqian. I'll go to the hospital later." "All right." Shen Longyue was exhausted. Not only was he physically tired, but he was also mentally tired. He had never been so tired before. After feeding the baby and coaxing him to sleep, Shen Jilia went to Shen Luo'an's room. After settling him down, he gave Yi Qianqian some instructions before driving to the hospital. When she stepped into the ward, Shen Luo'an happened to wake up. The first thing he asked when he woke up was, "How's Manting?" "Brother father," Shen Jilia said as he walked in. "Sister Manting is fine. She has passed the critical stage and is still under observation." When Shen Luo'an heard this, he immediately lifted the blanket and got out of bed. "I'll go take a look." As soon as he got off the bed, he staggered. Shen Jilia quickly held him up and said, "Be careful." Shen Luo'an's vision was a little blurry. It took him a while to stand up straight. Chapter 2038. Shen Luo'an's physical fitness wasn't particularly strong. He had endured for a long time yesterday and the day before, so he couldn't take it anymore. Shen Jilia held him and sighed softly. "Brother, you have to take care of yourself so that you can take care of Manting." Shen Luo'an opened his eyes and composed himself. "I'll go and take a look." Shen Manting was in the ICU while Shen Luo'an looked in through the glass. His heart ached when he saw her hands and feet tied up. Her head was completely wrapped with only a white bandage that was slightly bleeding. She looked particularly pathetic. His heart felt as if it had been fiercely stabbed, and the pain was almost suffocating. When he came back to his senses, he found that tears had rolled down his face. Shen Luo'an's body twitched and he couldn't bear it anymore. He squatted down and cried bitterly. Shen Jilia had lived to his late 20s and had grown up with Shen Luo'an. He had never seen him like this before. He squatted down silently and stood side by side with him. Shen Jilia gently patted his shoulder and didn't make a sound. Shen Manting slept for half a month. The doctor finally confirmed that she had become a vegetable. The atmosphere in the Shen family was oppressive. 2 years wasn't long, but it wasn't short either. Since Shen Manting was lying in the hospital, Shen Luo'an had devoted himself to the studio. He spent the rest of his time in the studio, except for the 2 hours he spent by Shen Manting's bed with the child. "Daddy!" The child stumbled into Shen Luo'an's arms, holding a cute fluffy toy in his hands. "Daddy, this is a gift from Grandma." Shen Luo'an stood up with his son in his arms and said, "Little bunny, you're so cute." Little Moon grinned and said, "Daddy, come see Mommy." Shen Luo'an's eyes softened and he said, "Okay, Daddy will take you to see Mommy." Little Moon was very obedient. He had just celebrated his 2nd birthday and was very intelligent. His facial features looked more and more like Shen Luo'an, as if they were carved from the same mold. Shen Luo'an drove him to the hospital. It was very quiet. It was a particularly warm winter. The hospital was a little quieter than usual after the new year. He led the little boy to Shen Manting's ward with ease. He lowered his head and said, "What did Daddy teach you? What do you have to do first when you enter the ward?" "Knock on the door." Little Moon held the bunny in his arms, clenched his fists, and knocked on the door twice. He even said, "Knock, knock." Shen Luo'an smirked. Then he pushed the door open and shouted along with Little Moon, "Mom, Little Moon is here to see you." The father and son walked in, but when Shen Luo'an saw the hospital bed, he suddenly felt as if all the blood in his body had flowed backward to his brain. Suddenly, his mind went blank. The sick bed was empty. Suddenly Shen Luo'an roared, "Where is he?" Xiao Yue was startled by her loud voice. Little Moon's mouth twitched, and he took a step back and burst into tears. Shen Luo'an also realized that he was overreacting. He quickly picked up the child and went outside. He roared, "Where is she? Who is looking after this ward? Where is Shen Manting?" His voice was extremely loud. His voice echoed in the corridor. Soon, a nurse ran over and poked her head in to take a look. There was no one in the ward. Her heart skipped a beat and she asked, "Where is he?" Chapter 2039. The nurse shuddered and immediately said, "I'll go look for her right away." After saying that, she ran away as if she was escaping. Little Moon had stopped crying. He hugged Shen Luo'an's neck and asked, "Daddy, where's Mommy?" Shen Luo'an couldn't help panicking. His heart was beating extremely fast, and an unbearable despair was currently pressing down on his chest, causing him to almost be unable to breathe. "Daddy, don't cry." Little Moon's soft little palm brushed across Shen Luo'an's eyes. Shen Luo'an took a deep breath and coaxed him softly. "Little Moon's a good boy. Daddy will take you to Grandpa first." It wasn't far from the hospital director's office. Shen Longyue was shocked to see Shen Luo'an's reddened eyes. "What's wrong?" Shen Luo'an tried to calm himself down and said, "Daddy, look after the child. Manting is missing." Shen Longyue was shocked. "What? Why would she disappear out of nowhere?" Shen Luo'an also had the same question welling up in his heart. However, no one could answer him. "Now, we can only check the surveillance footage to see when Manting left. Daddy, I'll leave this matter to you. I'll go look for her. Even the nurse didn't find her, so she can't have gone far." Shen Longyue knew the gravity of the matter and nodded. "Okay." After receiving his confirmation, Shen Luo'an immediately put the child down and ran away. Little Moon was puzzled. He tilted his head and asked, "Grandpa, where did Daddy go?" Shen Longyue picked up the child and said, "Daddy went to look for Mommy." Then, he made a phone call and went to the surveillance room. Shen Luo'an ran hurriedly to the ward and corridor next to him. At the same time, there were many doctors and nurses looking for him. A vegetable had disappeared without anyone noticing. This matter was simply absurd to the extreme. Many people hurried around to look for him. Soon, everyone knew what had happened. After checking the surveillance footage, there was no one like Shen Manting who had left. Shen Luo'an went from the first floor to the 7th floor but found nothing. Shen Luo'an leaned against the wall helplessly. He felt a cold touch on his back. Suddenly someone shouted, "Found her!" Shen Luo'an immediately became alert and ran in the direction of the voice. "Who? Found who?" "The vegetative patient in room 139 has been found." Shen Luo'an immediately rushed forward and saw a group of people blocking the door of a ward from afar. "Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me." Shen Luo'an pushed his way through the crowd. As soon as he entered, he heard a child crying. The child opened his mouth and cried, holding half a bun in his hand. After glancing at Shen Luo'an, he turned to look at the corner. In the corner, there was a woman with disheveled hair. His face was pale and his body was thin and weak. She was dressed in a loose hospital gown and was hugging her legs nervously. She raised her eyes and looked at Shen Luo'an. That look, that gaze. Clean and pure, like an innocent child. However, Shen Luo'an recognized Shen Manting at a glance. After lying in bed for 2 years, Shen Manting was as thin as a stick. But that charm, even if she were dead, he would still recognize it. Unknowingly, droplets of water were already dripping from his eyes. Shen Luo'an walked over and called out softly, "Manting!" Chapter 2040. His voice was trembling with obvious fear. Shen Luo'an was stunned. He suddenly squatted down and reached out to hold her arm. "What did you say?" "Ah!" Shen Manting's body trembled violently, and tears streamed down her face. She trembled in fear and shouted, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Uncle, let me go. I won't do it again." His voice was filled with regret and unspeakable fear. Shen Luo'an felt as if his heart had been bitten by thousands of ants. He stared at her in disbelief, his heart aching. Shen Manting begged and was about to kneel down. "Enough!" Shen Luo'an bellowed angrily. Then, he pulled her into his arms and held her firmly in his arms. Shen Manting was stunned, and her body trembled uncontrollably. "Enough, enough!" Shen Luo'an's voice was choked with sobs, filled with endless despair. He buried his face in her neck and said in a trembling voice, "It's really enough. Manting, I'm sorry. Shen Manting was stunned and didn't know what to do for a moment. She could clearly feel the warmth of the man in front of her, and the fear and nervousness in her heart immediately dissipated. For some reason, he felt a slight pain in his heart. However, he was still rational. She gently pushed him and shouted, "Uncle!" Shen Luo'an let go of her and looked at the blank expression on her face. He got up and said, "Get up. I'll take you home." Go home?" A look of fear flashed across Shen Manting's face. She pushed him away and shouted, Uncle Don't call me uncle. Shen Luoan's voice was a bit loud. But when he turned around, he saw that Shen Manting was obviously frightened. His heart ached, and his voice softened. Follow me back to the ward first. Let the doctor examine you. Shen Manting looked around. All the medical equipment was clearly displayed, and many people were wearing hospital gowns. There was also the smell of medicine and disinfectant in the air. Shen Menying suddenly panicked and burst into tears again. Am I sick again? Is Uncle Dean angry? Shen Luoan held her hand and slowly stood up. But when she heard this, she couldn't help but burst into tears. He covered his face with one hand and remained silent. Soon, he pushed his way through the crowd and walked out. Shen Manting remained quiet throughout, sobbing as she followed behind Shen Luoan. Don't cry. Then, he pulled her into his arms with one hand and said, Be quiet for the examination first. Answer whatever the doctor asks you later. Do you understand? Shen Manting nodded blankly. She sniffled hard and said, Got it. Shen Luoan picked up his phone and called Shen Jilia. Found it. As soon as he hung up the phone, he heard an old man's voice. Shen Manting looked over and saw a gentle and kind-looking man walking over. He was carrying a child who looked to be in his 50s or 60s. When Shen Longyue saw Shen Manting, he was shocked. Then he swallowed hard and said, Good, you're finally awake. It was Shen Yuexiao's first time seeing Shen Manting with her eyes open. He was a little curious, so he struggled to get off the bed and asked, Mom? Shen Manting heard his voice and looked around. Then she looked at Shen Luoan in astonishment and said, You are a woman? But. Chapter 2041. As soon as she finished speaking, the three people in the room all looked at her. A look of sorrow. A look of curiosity. A look of doubt. Shen Longyue frowned when he heard this. Luoan, what's going on? Shen Luoan looked at his father and shook his head blankly. She doesn't seem to recognize me. Soon, a doctor rushed over. When he saw Shen Longyue, he was stunned and called out, Director. Director. Shen Longyue nodded and said, Give her a checkup. Yes. The medical staff quickly arrived. Please take them out. Following his instructions, they quickly left the room. After a series of examinations, the doctors came out. However, when they came out, the doctors had a strange look on their faces. She seems to have forgotten who she is. What's going on? Shen Jilia hurried down. He was still wearing a white coat and was panting slightly. Is Sister Manting awake? Yes. Shen Luoan closed his eyes. That's great. It's good that she's awake. Everything else can be solved. Shen Jilia breathed a sigh of relief. Her brain was severely damaged. It's normal for her to have memory problems. I'll go in and take a look. The doctor also recognized Shen Jilia, so he nodded and didn't stop him. When Shen Jilia went in, he saw Shen Manting trying to sneak through the window. She had already lifted one foot, but she seemed to have no strength. It was very difficult. Shen Jilia was shocked and shouted, What are you doing? Shen Manting trembled violently and turned her head to look. When she saw Shen Jilia running over, she immediately hugged the window railing and shouted, No, don't pull me. I don't have money to pay for the medical fees. Just let me jump off the building and die. Shen Jilia was stunned. Without another word, he pulled her down from the chair. Shen Manting's body was as light as a swallow. He could directly pull her up with one hand. Shen Manting's face was sad and she struggled with her hands and feet. When she found that she couldn't move, she actually hugged Shen Jilia's thigh. Shen Jilia was shocked. Before he could react, he heard a loud roar coming from below. Sob, sob, sob. Uncle, I don't have money. Don't check me anymore. I'm an orphan. I don't have money. The orphanage is going to collapse. If Uncle Director knows that I've been checked so many times in the hospital, he'll definitely kill me. Please don't check me anymore. Shen Jilia didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he heard that. When she turned around, Shen Luoan and Shen Longyue had already walked in. Shen Luoan's face darkened when he saw what she was doing. He quickly stepped forward and pulled her away. But Shen Manting seemed to be possessed. She clung to Shen Jilia's thigh tightly and cried out, Uncle, don't pull me. I don't have money to pay for the medical fees even if you pull me. I'll pay you back when I grow up. Don't go looking for Uncle Director. He'll kill me. Chapter 2042. As soon as she said that, Shen Jilia burst into laughter. Shen Luo'an's face darkened. He wrapped his arms around her waist, lifted her up, and put her on the hospital bed. He looked at Shen Manting for a while and couldn't help but say, "Because I'm your man." Ah! Shen Manting looked at him with her eyes wide open. What? Shen Jilia quickly pulled Shen Luo'an and said, "Brother, don't scare her. Leave it to me. You can go out first." No. Shen Luo'an took a stool and sat down. You do what you need to do. I'll sit here. How can we do that? Shen Jilia frowned, but when he saw the unhappy look on his father's face, he couldn't help but cough softly and curl his lips. In that case, Dad, please take care of little Moon for a while. Shen Longyuan knew the gravity of the situation. He nodded and said, "Little Moon, let's go." Shen Yueshao didn't comply. He looked at Shen Manting with his big black eyes and said, "Mom." Shen Manting finally saw it clearly. She was shocked and exclaimed, "No way. Is she calling me mommy? When did I have such a big son?" Shen Longyuan's heart ached when he heard this. He glanced at Shen Manting and sighed. "Let's go, little Moon. Come back to see Mom later." Okay. Shen Yueshao was reluctant to leave. "Mom, little Moon will come back to see you tomorrow." Shen Manting heard a childish voice. Shen Manting listened to it and found it familiar. She seemed to hear this sentence every day. She felt a dull pain in her heart. Suddenly, she felt as if she had seen a ghost. She looked at the two men in front of her and sat quietly. Shen Luo'an picked up his recording pen and turned it on. He said, "From now on, I'll ask you a question and you'll answer it. Tell me everything you know and the truth. Do you understand?" Okay. Shen Manting looked at Shen Luo'an and then at Shen Jilia. She said, "Uncle, will your brother really pay for my medical expenses?" When Shen Jilia heard this, he chuckled. "How did you know he was my brother? You called him brother just now, and you called the grandfather just now Dad. Also, you look a little similar, which means that you are biological brothers, the sons of the grandfather just now." She then rubbed her stomach and said, "I'm so hungry. I'm so hungry that I don't have any strength left in me." Shen Jilia felt relieved. At the very least, his IQ wasn't low. Shen Jilia took a few notes in his notebook and said, "I'll get you something to eat later. Answer the question first." "How old are you?" 12 years old. A 12-year-old calls me uncle. Do I look that old? Shen Luo'an asked suddenly. Shen Jilia almost burst out laughing. It seemed that Shen Luo'an was very bothered by the way she addressed him as uncle. However, he immediately coughed lightly and said, "Brother, please keep quiet." Shen Luo'an immediately fell silent. Shen Manting said, "You look like you're in your 30s. Although you're not particularly old, you're much older than me." Yes, this was the 12-year-old Shen Manting. Shen Jilia made a few notes in the notebook and asked, "Do you remember what you were doing before you passed out?" "Of course I remember." Shen Manting looked a little sad and said without hesitation, "The director asked me to help him buy soy sauce and go back to cook. But when I went back, I tripped and the soy sauce bottle broke. I was beaten by the director's aunt. When I woke up, I was in the hospital." Shen Jilia frowned and looked up. He asked, "Do you remember what your name is?" "He Yunsuan." "How do you write it?" Chapter 2043. Shen Jilia and Shen Luo'an both looked at her. Shen Manting shrank back under their stares and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong? Have you always been called this name?" Shen Jilia asked. As he spoke, he looked at Shen Manting's expression and added, "Tell me the truth." Shen Manting frowned when she heard this and said, "This is my name, not Shen Manting. When I was young, I was abandoned on the street. They didn't even give me a birthday card. Later, an old man who picked up garbage sent me to an orphanage." Shen Luo'an was silent. Shen Jilia nodded and asked, "And then?" "Then the old man said that since he didn't raise me, why did he give birth to me? So, The director gave me this name. He Yunsuan. She gave a child such a name. Why did she allow it to exist? Shen Luo, and felt a little pain in his heart. He realized that he knew nothing about her. Do you know Zhang Meifeng? Shen Jilia recorded in his notebook and looked up at Shen Manting. Yes, Shen Manting nodded. She's my good friend, but the director likes her very much. She's beautiful and sensible. Shen Jilia and Shen Luo looked at each other. They both saw a trace of doubt in each other's eyes. What's wrong? Shen Manting looked at them and suddenly looked a little sad. She asked in a low voice. Did you find the wrong person? Is the person you're looking for actually Mei Feng? No, we're looking for you. Shen Jilia tapped the back of his hand with the pen and said slowly. Have you seen me? No. Have you seen him? No. What do you usually like to eat? Shen Manting exclaimed. When she heard this, she covered her growling stomach and said, I'm actually not picky. I eat anything. Shen Luoan suddenly asked, Do you eat onions? Ah. Shen Manting's face immediately fell. No. Do you eat coriander? No. Shen Luoan smiled lightly. Then why did you say you eat anything? Shen Manting was speechless. He asked a few more questions. Shen Manting did not hesitate and readily followed his advice. But when she asked about Shen Manting, there was an obvious look of doubt on her face. Who is Shen Yuexiao? Who is Shen Luoan? Who is Shen Jilia? I don't know anyone. All right, Shen Jilia said as he put the notebook away. I have a general understanding of the situation. Now, I have something to tell you. Don't be too shocked. What? Shen Manting looked at him curiously with an innocent look on her face. She was completely different from the usual Shen Manting. Shen Jilia paused for a moment, then stood up and said, Give me a moment. After walking out for a few minutes, he came back with a mirror in his hand. He handed it to Shen Manting and said, Take a look at yourself. When Shen Manting saw this, she was baffled. He took it and looked at it. He turned pale with fright. Ah! Shen Manting flung the mirror away and asked in horror, Who is this? This kind of reaction was a little too big. Chapter 2044. However, as soon as Shen Manting finished speaking, she found that the eyes of the two men in front of her remained unchanged. Shen Manting was shocked and suddenly felt a little like crying. She pursed her lips and burst into tears. You're lying to me. I haven't aged. This isn't me at all. I'm only 12 years old. Shen Jilia glanced at Shen Luo and sighed softly. Brother, we can't go on like this. Shen Luo also had a headache and said, You go ahead. Leave it to me. I'm afraid that you can't handle it. She seems to have lost her memory from the age of 12 to 29. It's a whole 17 years. You! Shen Manting had a bad feeling and looked at them. Didn't you say that I was 31 years old? Yes. Shen Jilia looked at her with a little sympathy in his eyes. You had a car accident when you were 29. Your hands and feet were broken, and your head was severely injured. You've been lying in bed for 2 years. What? What? Shen Manting couldn't believe it. You mean I've been in the hospital for 2 years? How much money is that? Shen Jilia was speechless. She turned around and patted Shen Luan on the shoulder. Communicate well and guide her. I'll go ahead. Okay. Shen Luo responded. His eyes calmly fell on Shen Manting. He slowly said, You're the mother of my child. It's my duty to take care of you. What? Shen Manting felt dizzy. I haven't grown up and I'm not married. How could I have a child? Unfortunately you did. Shen Luo walked over and poured her a glass of water. What do you want for dinner? Shen Manting immediately straightened up. So you're my husband. I want to have a big meal. Is that okay? Husband, Shen Luo was caught off guard. The words suddenly rippled in his heart. He looked at her with his amber eyes and said slowly, Yes. Shen Manting suddenly became excited and said, Then husband, I want to have a big meal. The kind that needs to be cut with a knife and fork. Her eyes were dark and bright, pure and clean, with expectation and desire. Shen Luoan's heart ached. He handed the water to her and said, "Drink some water first." Shen Manting took the water from him and gulped it down. "Are we going to have a feast?" she asked. "Not yet." Shen Manting was disappointed. "What? It's all a lie. You made me call you hubby. Give it back to me." He explained, "You've just woken up, so your body can't handle it yet. When you're better, I'll take you to whatever you want to eat." "Really?" Shen Manting looked at him expectantly. "You promised." "Yes, I will." Shen Luo nodded. "I'll ask my family to prepare a nutritious meal for you." "Sure." Shen Manting's eyes sparkled. He was secretly delighted. It seemed like it was pretty good. This uncle looked quite handsome, nice, and had a good personality. The most important thing was that she didn't have to be scolded by Uncle Dean, and she didn't have to deal with the people in the orphanage. She rolled her eyes and looked at Shen Luan. Then, "Hubby, can I ask you a question?" "Hubby." It was another word that caught him off guard. Shen Luoan straightened up and answered in a low voice. "Yes. We've already given birth to a child." "Have we kissed?" Shen Luoan looked at her again, perhaps because such a question was too childish. Chapter 2045. Shen Luoan glanced at her a few more times because her question was too childish. Shen Manting shrank back and whispered, "I swore that my first kiss would be reserved for my Prince Charming." Her silly and cute words made the soft part of Shen Luo restless for a moment. He moved an inch and leaned toward her. Shen Manting subconsciously shrank back, but in the next moment, Shen Luo had already reached out and clamped her chin, accurately capturing her lips. The soft and smooth touch was immediately transmitted from his lips. Shen Manting's eyes widened, but soon she closed them again. Shen Luo had never felt like this before. It turned out that Shen Manting would be so obedient when he kissed her. He couldn't help but ask for more. He gently pried open her lips and teeth, captured her softness, and slowly invaded. After an unknown period of time, Shen Manting couldn't stand it anymore. She gently pushed him away, and Shen Luo released her. Shen Manting immediately panted, and her cheeks were a little red. She looked at him shyly. Shen Luo was even more confused. He couldn't help but move closer and look at her deeply. Shen Manting shrank back, then lay on the bed and covered her head with the quilt. Her voice came from under the quilt, and it was a little muffled. "Honey, I don't want to have children anymore." After she had a big meal, she would consider whether to continue kissing her biological child. However, she was so hungry now. Kissing shouldn't make her pregnant, right? Shen Manting was a little uncertain. She lifted the quilt and revealed one eye. At a glance, she saw Shen Luo standing. Shen Luo looked at her with a deep gaze. He was a little sad and glad. Shen Manting suddenly felt that he was very pitiful. She whispered, "Honey, are you very sad?" When Shen Luo heard this, he suddenly smiled and said, "No." "Then why do you look so sad?" Shen Manting looked at him with a little guilt and apology. She whispered, "But I still want to say, don't kiss me in the future. What if I get pregnant? I don't want to have children. I heard that giving birth is very painful. Very painful. It can even kill people." Shen Manting thought of this and shrank back. When Shen Luo heard this, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Who told you that kissing will make you pregnant?" "Ah." Shen Manting's face was burning with embarrassment. She covered her face with the blanket in embarrassment and whispered, "That's what everyone says." Shen Luo let out a rare laugh. He moved closer and whispered, "I won't, but I'm your Prince Charming. Our child is already 2 years old. You have to call me hubby from now on. Do you understand?" Perhaps it was because Shen Luo was so close to her that she felt her heart warm up. Her face was also hot. She nodded and said, "Yes, I know, hubby." Shen Luo's heart softened, and tears welled up in his eyes. He turned around and said, "I'll make the call." Shen Manting looked at his back and suddenly felt a little sad. This feeling came out of nowhere. It was a little scary, but at the same time, there was satisfaction and excitement. This feeling seemed to be instinctive. Even she herself did not know what she was sad about, excited about, or satisfied about. He stayed in the hospital for 3 days. After 3 days, When the doctors confirmed that she was physically and mentally fit to be discharged, Shen Manting returned to the so-called home. It was a beautiful and luxurious house. She had never seen such a big and beautiful house. Mom. Chapter 2046. Shen Manting was a little frightened. It wasn't that she hadn't seen this child in the past few days, but it was still very difficult for her to accept that such a large meatball had actually popped out from her stomach. She looked at him and squatted down. Shen Yuexiao also looked at her. The mother and son looked at each other for a long time. The little fellow stretched out his arms and shouted, "Mommy, hug me." Shen Manting's heart suddenly softened. Her lips unconsciously curled into a smile, and she reached out to hug him. Manting is back. Nanny He's eyes were slightly red. "I'm glad you're back. I'm glad you're back." Shen Manting blinked her eyes in confusion. Shen Luoan reminded her, "This is Nanny He." "Hello, Nanny He." Shen Manting greeted her obediently and quickly followed Shen Luo and into the room with the infant in her arms. "This is our room." Shen Luo stood up straight and pointed to a small bed inside. "The baby sleeps there." Shen Manting nodded. "Are we going to sleep here?" As he spoke, he walked over and looked at the big bed. But when she turned around, she saw Shen Luo and slightly strange expression. Shen Manting thought she had said something wrong. She hugged the baby and shrank her head. She whispered, "Aren't Daddy and Mommy supposed to sleep together?" She didn't have parents, but the parents of other children slept in the same room, on the same bed. Shen Luoan's eyes softened. He nodded slightly. "Yes." Shen Manting breathed a sigh of relief. She sat down with the baby in her arms and said, "What a big bed. I've never slept in such a big bed before. Wow, it's so bouncy and comfortable." "Manting, you're back?" An old man's voice rang out. Shen Manting felt a sense of familiarity when she heard it. She put the baby down, stood up, and walked out. When she saw the old woman walking toward her, she greeted, "Grandma." Old Mrs. Shen immediately rushed forward and hugged Shen Manting with reddened eyes. "It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back. You're finally out of the hospital. Let Luo and take you out for a walk." "Yeah." Shen Manting smiled slyly and said, "Hubby said he's taking me out for a feast today." "Hubby." Nanny He couldn't help turning around to take a second look at the way she addressed him. The others had already seen how thorough Shen Manting's amnesia was, so they were not surprised by it. Old Mrs. Shen nodded and said, "All right, go ahead then. Luoan, take good care of Manting." "Okay." Shen Luoan chuckled. "I won't be bringing little Moon along. Just watch." "Okay." Old Mrs. Shen's eyes curved into crescents as she smiled. Manting was finally as obedient as she was now. Of course, he had to create more opportunities for them to be alone together. He took Shen Manting for a stroll around the neighborhood of the house. Everything he saw was new and interesting. She didn't reject Shen Luo and holding her hand. His palm was soft and warm. Chapter 2047. Shen Luoan's heart warmed when he saw her pouting little mouth in front of him. He lowered his head slightly and gently kissed her lips. He gently held her in his arms and felt her obviously too thin body. His heart ached a little. He reached out and pulled the seatbelt behind her. He let go of her and said, "I'll take you to eat your favorite food." Shen Manting's cheeks were red and she was very happy. She nodded and looked at Shen Luoan with a pair of shining eyes. She said sincerely, "Honey, you're so nice. Honey, you're so nice." It was impossible for Shen Manting to utter those words, but she could hear them clearly from the side. Shen Luoan's hands trembled slightly when he buckled her seat belt. If she knew how much she used to hate him, would she still say such words? Would she still say good things about him? Would she still call him husband? There was no doubt about the answer. But soon, it returned to normal. "Let's go." Okay. The car drove steadily to the Western restaurant that Shen Manting used to like to go to in the past. He ordered her favorite dishes. Shen Manting looked around curiously, as if she had never seen it before. She leaned forward and whispered, "Honey, is our family very rich?" Shen Luoan chuckled. "Why do you ask? One look and you can tell that this is a very expensive place. I just looked at the menu and it costs more than $500 for a steak. It's so expensive. When I was obedient, Uncle Dean only gave me 10 cents to buy candy. Shen Manting felt a little wronged as she spoke. But soon she covered her mouth and said timidly, "Honey, am I too childish?" Shen Luoan felt a slight pain in his heart and looked at her sadly. He shook his head against his will and said, "No, it's very good." Shen Manting vaguely felt that he was lying. But she didn't expose him. Nodding his head, he quietly sat up straight and still. Soon, the dishes were served. There was only one steak on a very fragrant and high-end plate. Shen Manting opened her eyes wide but didn't say anything. After the waiter left, she said, "Honey, it's even more beautiful than what I saw on TV." Shen Luoan chuckled and picked up the knife and fork. "Come on, I'll teach you how to cut it." "Yes." Shen Manting beamed. She looked at Shen Luoan's expression and demonstrated it to him, and he quickly followed her advice. Just like she knew how to use it. After a hearty meal, Shen Luoan and Shen Manting went shopping. He bought a lot of clothes. Shen Manting was too thin now. After choosing 2 sets of clothes, she tugged at Shen Luoan and said, "Honey, I've just woken up. The smallest one is already too big for me. Don't buy it now. I'll buy it again when I gain some weight." Shen Luoan nodded with a smile. Returning home was a rewarding journey. Shen Yuexiao had already fallen asleep. Shen Luoan and Shen Manting crept into the room quietly. "Go take a shower first." "I'll get you your pajamas," Shen Luoan said. "Okay." Shen Manting didn't dare to speak too loudly and quickly walked into the bathroom. However, he was dazzled by the spacious bathroom and exclaimed, "It's too big." Shen Luoan was holding her pajamas. When he heard this, he smiled and asked, "Do you know how to shower?" Shen Manting looked at him as if he was retarded. "Do you think I'm stupid?" She took the pajamas and pushed him out. "Don't peek at me." The smile on Shen Luoan's face widened. He nodded with a smile and said, "I'll wait for you." Shen Manting's face turned red. Chapter 2048. Her heart was beating fast. Shen Manting was in a good mood. She hummed a tune, took off her clothes, and entered the shower room. She turned on the water and tested the temperature before she suddenly realized that something was wrong. When she was in the orphanage, she used to boil water for bathing. Why did she know how to use such an advanced thing here? Shen Manting suddenly felt a little excited and muttered, "It seems that I'm really a genius." While she was happily bathing, she touched her small chest. The bulge seemed so big. She couldn't hold it with one hand. She was so thin, how did it grow? After bathing awkwardly, she found that her body was different everywhere. After a while, Shen Manting put on clean pajamas and walked out. Her wet hair was wrapped up. Shen Luoan didn't know what he was doing. When he saw her come out, he seemed to hide something under the quilt. Shen Manting blushed and shouted, "Honey, what are you doing?" "Nothing." Shen Luoan stood up. "Dry your hair. Don't catch a cold." "I won't." Shen Manting waved her arm. "There's a heater in the room. It's not cold. Sit down." "Okay." Shen Manting sat on the bed and couldn't help but look under the quilt curiously. Shen Luoan noticed her little movement, but he pretended not to see it. He removed the towel from her head and slowly dried her hair. The heater in the room was on, and soon her hair was half dry. Shen Luoan quickly went to take a shower, and Shen Manting immediately reached out to the quilt. She felt a small box. The box was made of black velvet and felt smooth and comfortable. She opened the box, and inside was a ring. It was a big, shiny diamond in the shape of a heart. Shen Manting's eyes lit up. She couldn't help but pick it up and put it on her finger. Almost automatically, she put it on the ring finger of her left hand. There was no flesh on her finger, so it was easy to put on. It was very loose and dangled on her finger. But for some reason, she suddenly felt an unknown place in her heart began to ache. She suddenly felt a little sad. She stared at the ring, and her eyes were a little hot. An urge to cry was difficult to suppress. It came crazily but inexplicably. He quietly put the ring back and continued to stuff it under the blanket, pretending that he had not touched it at all. But when she fell onto the bed, she couldn't help but burst into tears. She whimpered softly, her heart was empty, very empty. When Shen Luoan came out, Shen Manting was already asleep on the bed. The position was in the middle. The lights were still on, very bright. However, she was sleeping soundly. Her even breathing could be heard, almost in sync with her son's. He walked up quietly and subconsciously touched the ring he had just placed on the table. It's still there. He was a little disappointed, but he quickly placed the ring in the drawer of the bedside table. He turned off the lights and lay down. There was a faint sense of satisfaction and joy in his heart. He reached out and gently pulled her into his embrace. Shen Manting was asleep. When she sensed his breath, she couldn't help but lean forward and reach out to grab his clothes. Honey, I feel so sad. Shen Luoan's body stiffened. He placed his hand on her cheek and asked softly, "What's wrong?" Chapter 2049. Shen Luoan's body stiffened when he heard this. His heart ached and he looked down at her face. The room was dark, but he could still clearly feel the tears on Shen Manting's face. She was different from before. She was different at all. In the past, Shen Manting would cry with a smile. It was ugly and cruel. But now she was crying. She was just crying. She was different. She was different. Shen Luoan silently pulled her into his arms and hugged her tightly. Shen Manting subconsciously leaned over and wrapped her arms around him. She rubbed against his chest. His body smelled faintly of shampoo. It was warm. Shen Luoan gently patted her back and whispered, "Don't think about anything. Go to sleep." Okay. Shen Manting closed her eyes and soon fell into a deep sleep. Shen Luoan hugged her and his heart ached. He closed his eyes, but his mind was in a mess and he couldn't sleep. Early morning. Shen Manting's body ached from sleeping and she stretched. But when she turned around, she saw Shen Luoan looking at her. His amber eyes were clear and quiet. Shen Manting was startled and her body twitched. Then, she shrank back and her cheeks were a little hot. "Good morning, honey." Shen Luoan smiled and said, "Good morning." Shen Manting immediately got up and went to the bathroom. She closed the door and was in a good mood. After washing up, she walked out and saw Shen Luoan dressing the child. Shen Yuexiao saw Shen Manting coming out and called out with a smile, "Mom!" Shen Manting walked over and touched the little boy's head. "Good boy." The little boy was a little happy. He opened his arms and rubbed them in Shen Manting's direction. "Give me a hug." Shen Manting squatted down and picked up the little boy. "Let's go. Mom will take you to dinner." "Okay." Shen Yuexiao was very happy and hugged Shen Manting's neck. Shen Luoan smiled with relief when he saw it, but then he reminded her, "You haven't brushed your teeth yet. Help little Moon brush his teeth first." Shen Manting was shocked. "He's so young and he's already brushing his teeth? Of course you have to brush your teeth. It won't hurt so much when you're changing your teeth." Shen Luoan tapped her nose. "You have to instill good education and habits in your child." "Oh." Shen Manting held the baby in her arms. "Let's go then. Does he know how to do it?" "Yes." Little Moon had already spoken up. "Mommy, I can brush my teeth." Shen Manting couldn't help but exclaim, "He's indeed a doctor's child." She carried him into the bathroom and said, "Let's go." From today onwards, she would learn to be a good mother. Be a good mother. No matter what, she must have given birth to this child. Otherwise, how could he look so much like her? Moreover, he was adorable no matter how she looked at him. She could get a son without having to suffer any pain. It was worth it. But just as this thought flashed through his mind, he heard the child's voice. "P." Shen Manting froze and looked at him. Little Moon pouted and said, "Mommy, pee." She looked at Shen Luoan and said, "Dear, the baby wants to pee." Shen Luoan chuckled when he saw her pleading look. He took the baby from her arms and said, "Go and have breakfast first. I'll clean up for your baby." "Okay," Shen Manting replied and turned around. She felt sweet inside and said, "I'll wait for you." Chapter 2050. When Shen Manting walked out, the whole family was already outside. A young woman was sitting next to Shen Jielia. She looked very lively and beautiful. When she saw Shen Manting, her eyes lit up and she exclaimed, "Manting!" Shen Manting was a little flattered. She stepped back and said, I'm Yi Qianqian. Yi Qianqian pointed to herself and then to Shen Jilia's wife. As she spoke, she hugged Shen Manting excitedly. "You're finally awake. That's great." Yi Qianqian's eyes were a little red. She patted her back and said in a choked voice, "Everything will be fine." Shen Manting suddenly didn't know how to react. She laughed and said, "Sisi, I'm hungry."
Oh.
Yi Qianqian immediately released her and smiled happily. "Well, let's eat together." Yi Qianqian held Shen Manting's hand and walked to the table. Shen Manting looked around and called out, "Dad, Mom, Grandma." The people who were called all smiled. Mrs. Shen smiled and said, "Don't be so formal at home." "Well, eat more. Look at how thin you are." Old Mrs. Shen's heart ached for her. She handed her a bowl and asked, "When will your body be as fair and plump as it used to be?" Shen Manting glanced at her body. Fair and plump? She had never experienced what it felt like to be fair and plump. So, she had been fair and plump before? Shen Manting sat down and nodded. She was a little touched. When they were halfway through eating, Shen Luoan came out with his son. Little Moon was bouncing up and down. When he saw Shen Manting, he called out, "Mom!" Shen Manting's eyes softened and she nodded. Shen Luo and carried him to the dining table and sat down. He said, "Who else hasn't been called?" "Grandpa." "Grandma." After greeting Grandpa and Grandma in a childish voice, his eyes fell on old Mrs. Shen. He blinked and called out, "Grandma." Shen Luoan chuckled and pinched his little face. He corrected, "Great-grandma." "Take Grandma." He shouted loudly, but it wasn't accurate. Everyone laughed. Old Mrs. Shen smiled and gave him a cup of soy milk. "Say it again." "Take Grandma." Yi Qianqian couldn't stop laughing and asked, "What about me? What about me?" Little Moon tilted his head and thought for a moment, but he still didn't know what to say. He looked at Shen Luoan for help. "Daddy?" Shen Luoan chuckled and greeted, "Aunt." Little Moon called out softly, "Sensen." "Auntie." Yi Qianqian corrected her. "Lift your tongue, Auntie." Little Moon looked a little helpless, as if he knew that he had called out the wrong name. He shrunk his head and whispered, "Sensen." Yi Qianqian gave up and gave him a small bun. "Be good." Xiao Yuer took it from her and beamed with joy. Shen Luoan bowed his head and said, "Thank you, Aunt." "Xie Sensen." The whole family couldn't help but laugh. Shen Jilia finally walked over and chuckled helplessly. Calling Mom and Dad is quite smooth, but calling anyone else is no good. "Uncle." Little Moon looked at Shen Jilia excitedly and called out to him. Shen Jilia laughed and said, "You're smart." Little Moon knew that he had been praised and swung his legs happily. "Our Little Moon can talk about other things." Shen Luoan sat beside him and said, "What do you want to say to Mommy?" Little Moon smiled and pointed at Shen Luoan. Then he shouted, "Mommy, Little Moon is here to see you." Chapter 2051. It was a very familiar sentence. It was as if she had heard it countless times when she was asleep. After the young child finished speaking, he laughed happily. He took a bite of the little bun in his hand and smiled happily. She felt a lump in her throat and had the urge to cry. Shen Luoan seemed to notice Shen Manting's gaze and looked at her. His eyes were a little soft, and he looked at her with a smile on his face. After breakfast, Shen Luoan handed the baby to Yi Qianqian. After getting her full assurance, he led Shen Manting out. Shen Manting sat in the driver's seat. This time, she had learned to be smart. She buckled her seatbelt and looked at Shen Luoan. "Honey, where are we going today?" "To the orphanage." Shen Luoan glanced at her. "Back to the orphanage." Shen Manting opened her eyes wide and said, "Are we going to the orphanage?" "Yes." Shen Manting was a little scared after getting a positive answer. She slid her hand on the seatbelt and asked, "Why are we going back?" "To find your good friend." Shen Luoan looked at her. "Do you remember what you told me your name?" Shen Manting felt a little strange when she heard this. After thinking for a while she said, He Yunsuan. Was that your name when you were in the orphanage? Shen Manting nodded and looked at the expression on Shen Luo'an's face. She felt a little scared and asked, "What's wrong?" "What about Zhang Meifeng? She is my good friend." Shen Manting was very sure. "Honey, you have asked this question twice. The last time was in the ward a few days ago." He and Shen Jilia were asking this question. When it came to this question, both of their expressions didn't look too good. They were indescribably solemn. Could it be that there was a problem? Shen Manting looked at him, but Shen Luo'an didn't say anything. He said, "Sit tight." "Okay." Shen Manting was already seated. "I'm ready." Shen Luo'an glanced at her, started the car and sped away. By the time they arrived at the orphanage, almost an hour had passed. During this hour, Shen Manting looked out of the window and played with her phone from time to time. He stopped the car and turned off the GPS. "We're here," he said. Shen Manting looked up and exclaimed, "Hubby, why has this place become so run down? It's been 19 years. Of course it will change." Shen Luo'an unbuckled his seatbelt. "Let's go." When Shen Manting got out of the car, the sun was blazing. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the two children sitting at the door. The two children looked to be only 5 or 6 years old. When they saw Shen Luo'an's car, their eyes lit up in surprise. Shen Manting felt a little sour in her heart. Finally, I'm not the one looking at other people's cars. Now these children are also looking at my car. Humph. She caught up with him, held his arm and asked, "Hubby, is the director still around?" Shen Luo'an asked. "Is the director still around?" "Yes." Shen Luo'an glanced at her. "Do you remember which room it was?" Shen Manting nodded and pulled Shen Luo'an into the yard. The children were running around and playing games. Seeing these two strangers dressed so well, they couldn't help but take a few more glances. "Director!" Shen Manting shouted. "Is the director around?" Chapter 2052. Are you the dean? Shen Manting looked at the man in front of her, who was about the same age as Shen Luo'an, and was surprised. The man looked at her and said, "The dean is resting at the moment. Why are you looking for him?" Shen Manting breathed a sigh of relief and said, "I used to live here and now I'm back to look for him." "Oh." The man looked at Shen Manting and said, "Who are you? Why do you look so familiar?" However, he was too thin. He looked so thin that he was out of shape. She couldn't recognize him at all. When Shen Manting heard this, she smiled and said, "Do you know me? I'm He Yunsuan." The man looked at her in surprise and said, "Yunsuan? Really? Why are you? Why is he so thin?" "Yes." Shen Manting looked as usual, then glanced at Shen Luo'an, took his arm and said, "This is my husband, Shen Luo'an. He's a scientist." The man was even more surprised. "A scientist?" "No." Shen Luo'an pressed Shen Manting's hand. "I'm just researching some medicine." "Is the old dean here?" "Oh, he's sleeping. The old man hasn't been in good health recently." The man kept glancing at Shen Manting as he spoke and said, "Yunsuan has become so big. Time flies. Do you still remember who I am?" "Who?" Shen Manting looked at him with her eyes wide open and frowned. She vaguely felt that he was a little familiar, but the difference from when he was a child was too big. Shen Manting couldn't recognize who he was at all. The man laughed and said, "Don't you remember me? I'm He Junxing." "He Junxing?" Shen Manting covered her mouth. "No way, how is it possible?" He Junxing touched his head with a little embarrassment. "Yes, I've changed a little. Come on in and sit down." Shen Manting's face was still full of disbelief when she led the two in. "Isn't He Junxing the silly little brother from before? You look so smart now." Shen Manting's memory stopped at the age of 12, so she didn't have many words in her mind. What he said at this moment was the truth of the heavens. He Junxing felt even more embarrassed and said, yes." Shen Luo'an's lips curved into a smile. He pressed Shen Manting down and said, "She got into a car accident 2 years ago and was hospitalized for 2 years. She has some memory problems and can only remember things from before she was 12 years old." He Junxing was stunned for a moment. Then he looked at Shen Manting with understanding in his eyes. He looked at her sympathetically and said, "Yunsuan is a very smart person. The headmaster likes him very much. I'll go see if the headmaster has woken up. Wait a minute. Shen Luan stopped him. Since you grew up with her, you should know a lot about her. Let's talk first. He Junsheng looked at Shen Manting and nodded. Have a seat. I'll make you some tea. Shen Luoan was indeed a little thirsty, so he didn't refuse. Shen Manting made herself at home and pulled Shen Luoan to sit on the bone stool. The decoration of the house was very old, and the furniture seemed to be from more than 10 years ago. Shen Manting looked around and suddenly stood up. She said, Hubby, Mei Fong and I drew a butterfly here. Come and take a look. Shen Luoan stood up and walked over. Sure enough, he saw the shallow marks. There were 2 butterflies, one crooked and the other dancing. There was a signature at the bottom, and it was written Zhang Mei Fong at the bottom. On the butterfly that looked slightly better, it was written He Yunsuan. There was also a smiling face at the bottom. The marks were very shallow, and it was obvious that a long time had passed. The orphanage was not big, and the decoration was very old. Shen Luoan looked around and saw that He Junsheng had already brought the tea set. Shen Luoan pulled Shen Manting back to sit down. He Junsheng smiled and said, It's been a long time since we had a guest. The tea set was left for a while, and it was just washed. After boiling the water, He Junsheng looked at Shen Manting and said, She just woke up, didn't she? She's too thin. Yes, she woke up a few days ago. Shen Luoan looked at him. But, are you sure she's He Yunsuan? Yes, He Junsheng looked at her. She's witty and clever. She's obviously powerful. Who else could it be if not Yunsuan? Then, what about Zhang Mei Fong? Shen Luoan asked. At the mention of this name, He Junsheng was quite emotional. Mei Fong is quiet and seems to be quiet. She's not very smart. Compared to Yunsuan, she's far behind. Where is she? She disappeared when she was a teenager. I don't know where she went. At that time, I called the police and looked for the surveillance cameras, but they couldn't find her anywhere. He Junsheng disinfected the tea set when the water was boiling. It's a pity. Mei Fong is kind and good-looking. Back then, my grandmother came to adopt her. Shen Luoan looked at him. At that time, she found someone based on her horoscope, and the person she adopted was Zhang Mei Fong. He Junsheng's teacup trembled, and the cup fell. The boiling water splashed and sprayed Shen Manting's fingers. Shen Manting shrank her hand in pain and hurriedly covered it. Shen Luoan was shocked. He pulled her hand over and quickly checked it. Are you okay? I'm fine. Shen Manting was a little embarrassed. She pushed his hand away and looked at He Junsheng. Junsheng, can't you find Mei Fong now? He Junsheng suddenly looked a little flustered and said, Who's here? A slightly old voice was heard. An old man who looked to be in his 50s or 60s walked over. Shen Manting recognized him at a glance. Uncle Dean. She stood up and walked over to him to help him. When Uncle Dean saw Shen Manting, he was stunned. You are Yunsuan. Shen Manting said her name without any hesitation. The moment she said it, the look on the dean's face changed a little. He subconsciously glanced at Shen Luoan and asked, Who is this? My husband. Shen Manting smiled and helped the old man to sit down beside the chair. Long time no see. Yes, long time no see. The dean smiled, but he looked a little uncomfortable. I haven't been here for a long time. You're here for? Dean, I want to know where Zhang Mei Fong is. The dean's expression changed. Zhang Mei Fong. He Junsheng looked at him and frowned. Dean, it's okay. Mei Fong. Mei Fong was adopted. The dean felt a little guilty. She hasn't been back for many years. Didn't she get lost? Shen Luoan asked. Mister, he just said that Zhang Mei Fong got lost when she was a teenager. Moreover, you said that she was adopted. When she became an adult, she was adopted by our family again. What's going on? The person they wanted to adopt was Zhang Mei Fong. Chapter 2053. The person they wanted to adopt was Zhang Mei Fong. In the end, they adopted He Yunsuan instead. Grandma would never lie to her family, so there was only one explanation. Grandma had been deceived. According to He Junxing, Zhang Meifeng had long been lost. In the end, when Grandma went to look for her, the orphanage replaced Zhang Meifeng with He Yunsuan. Why did they do that? The director was sweating profusely when he heard this. He panicked and said, "You are. My name is Shen Luan." Shen Luo, and took out his business card. The director held the white business card in his hand and couldn't help but feel nervous. My grandmother adopted a girl named Zhang Meifeng from this orphanage. As Shen Luoan spoke, he paid close attention to the director's expression. My grandmother firmly believed that she was my missing sister, who had been missing for more than 10 years. When she came to look for her, she brought along her birth date. Later, when she did a paternity test, she discovered that she had nothing to do with our family. The director looked up at him and said, "Maybe it was a mistake." "Yes, we thought so too," Shen Luan said slowly. But this time, Manting got into a car accident and was bedridden for 2 years. When she woke up, she only remembered things before she was 12 years old and believed that her name was He Yunsuan. Then, what about Zhang Meifeng? The more the director listened, the more nervous he became. He Junsheng looked at the director and sighed softly. "Uncle Director, I just told him that Meifeng went missing when she was 14 years old." The director looked at He Junsheng in disbelief. "You?" He Junsheng lowered his head guiltily. "I forgot about that for a moment. I'm sorry." Sigh. The director put down the business card and looked sad. "Mr. Shen, I'm sorry. What do you mean?" When she was ready to adopt Meifeng, she had already gone missing. At that time, she used Meifeng's date of birth to look for her. The director looked sad. At that time, the orphanage was poor. She said that if she could find her granddaughter, she would give us 100,000 yuan as a token of appreciation. "So you lied to my grandmother?" Shen Luoan frowned slightly. "Does the date of birth that my grandmother provided match Meifeng's?" The president nodded. "That's right. At that time, I was muddle-headed. I wanted the $100,000, and I wanted Yun Cun to live a good life. So I asked Yun Cun to pretend to be Meifeng and go to your house." As he spoke, he looked at Shen Manting. Shen Manting's eyes were already brimming with tears. "What about Meifeng?" "I don't know." The director shook his head. "She was a young girl at that time. It's normal for her to be kidnapped and sold." After returning from the orphanage, Shen Manting was in low spirits. On his way here, he looked left and right. But when Shen Manting returned, she was speechless.